For some inexplicable reason, Nick's father reading the newspaper popped into his mind. He remembered how his dad would snap the paper open, creating a sharp sound followed by the soft rustle of pages, signaling he had found an interesting article to share. It was an unconscious habit that drew everyone's attention. As Nick closed his e-reader, he wished it could create a similar sound. Even snapping its case produced only a dull thud. He glanced at his wife, Laura, who remained engrossed in her e-reader, not acknowledging him. After a loud sigh and receiving no response, he announced he was going for a drive. Laura, deep into a historical novel about in Bullen, didn't reply. Nick settled into his old hatchback, unsure where to go, and stared at the garage door through the rain on his windshield. After 5 minutes, he decided to head to the nearby shopping center despite his reluctance to navigate through crowds of teenagers on a wet winter day. The traffic was heavy, and it felt like everyone had forgotten how to drive in the rain. Arriving at the shopping center, he noted the packed parking lot and parked at the far end, avoiding the frantic search for a closer spot. Dreading the walk through the drizzle, he donned his jacket, feeling cold and damp by the time he reached the entrance. The air inside the mall was warm but had an unpleasant odor reminiscent of damp clothes drying. As he wandered, he occasionally glanced at store displays, feeling underwhelmed by the women's clothing that seemed unflattering. Stumbling upon a coffee shop, he joined the line behind young customers ordering complicated drinks. When it was his turn, he simply asked for a small coffee with milk, only to be informed that the smallest size was medium. After a frustrating exchange, he paid $6 for a plain coffee and settled at a table outside the shop, hoping it would warm him. While sipping the too-hot drink, Nick began people-watching. He was struck by the sight of young women who were either significantly overweight or underweight and the prevalence of tattoos among teenagers, which he believed should be illegal until they were old enough to understand the implications. 10 years earlier, his daughter had roamed the mall, leading to arguments over her clothing and makeup. He recalled the importance she placed on how others perceived her, knowing the teenage drama would eventually pass. As he observed the girls, he contemplated the challenges their parents faced, aware that one day these girls would grow into women and forge their own paths in life. He looked at the women who were closer to his age mid-50s. It was depressing to think that these were the same women who had been so vibrant, sexy, and alive only 20 years earlier. It was as if they had given up on being attractive short hair, no makeup, loose shirts, and stretch pants that should never have been worn on their overweight bodies. Some of the stretch pants left nothing to the imagination. Unfortunately, his wife had adopted the same fashions. He sipped his coffee. It had cooled enough to be drinkable while he'd been watching people walk by. The women weren't the only ones who had forgotten how to look good. The men were overweight as well. They wore wrinkled pants with loose shirts that helped hide their substantial guts. He looked down and sighed. He wasn't ready to be on the cover of GQ magazine himself. He had never thought about how much life inside the house had revolved around the children until after they were gone. The conversations had all focused on what the kids were doing right or wrong, their plans, their dreams, and just the general drama of being young and exploring the world for the first time. His wife even planned all activities around the kids. Without the kids at home, there was nothing to talk about. His daughter, Ella, had moved out of the house 3 months ago. That had been a big deal, encompassing 2 months of talking about it, weeks of apartment hunting, and more weeks of shopping. His wife had been right in the middle of it, buying housewarming presents of a practical nature, such as a vacuum cleaner, and presents of a less practical nature, such as a picture to hang on the wall. He had been surprised to learn that his daughter's move had cost him as much as 2 months' rent had cost her. Nick wasn't upset about the money after all. He had slipped her some cash to help out with the bills until she had gotten an idea of how much it would cost her to live on her own. He was her father, and fathers did care about their daughters. It hadn't been the same when his son, Mark, had moved out of the house. He, his wife, and Mark had gone to a discount store one afternoon and purchased everything the boy would need for his place. The next day, Mark had moved into his apartment, and that was that. The noise level in the house dropped a little, but not a lot, as Ella tended to be involved in a lot more things socially than Mark had. Now, with both kids gone, the house had turned into a mausoleum. No one came running into the place shouting that they had good news, or that some life-shattering disaster had befallen them that day. The incessant music that had blared out of one bedroom was gone. The telephone ringing at all hours of the day or night had stilled. To be honest, he had appreciated the peace and quiet for the first month or so. It was nice to sit down and watch an entire movie without interruption. He had enjoyed reading a book in a tranquil environment. He had even appreciated being able to have a drink at night without fear that he'd be called away for some reason. It was nice being able to plan things without having to learn the kid's schedule first. Then the quiet began to eat at him. He couldn't understand what the problem was. There was something missing, something very important, and he didn't know what it was. A sense of unease was eating away at him, making his temper short. It was getting so bad that it was affecting his job. Sighing, he realized that he was getting old. It had crept up on him without him being aware of it. Yesterday, he thought of himself as 30-something, and today he felt 70. He was becoming the grumpy old man who looked at everything around himself and found that he didn't like it. Nick finished his coffee and tossed the cup toward a nearby trash can. Although the cup hit the edge, it did go in. He raised a fist in a little sign of glory. It was the first little spark of pleasure in his whole day. Continuing his little tour through the mall, he stopped in a small electronics store. It had the usual selection of computers, cell phones, electronic accessories, televisions, and stereos. He paused in front of the stereo systems. There were only 4 different styles on display. He picked the smallest and least expensive one, thinking that he could get a little music to chase away the depressing silence in the house. Maybe if it wasn't so quiet, he might get rid of that uneasy feeling, although there was a worm of doubt that it wouldn't be that easy. It didn't take long for him to discover that lugging even a small stereo system around the mall wasn't the most pleasant activity in the world. The box was bulky, and there just wasn't a good way to hold it. Carrying the plastic bag in the normal manner had the box hitting his knee with each step. Slinging the plastic bag over his shoulder caused the plastic to cramp his fingers. He took his purchase out to his car, getting soaked again from the continuing drizzle. He looked at the entrance to the mall and didn't feel like taking that hike again. He spent some time in the car, waiting for it to warm up before driving off. Actually, he was waiting to warm himself up before driving off. There wasn't much traffic on the road leading away from the mall. He still didn't have a real destination in mind, so he just kept driving. A long drive in the countryside would have been ideal if it had been a nicer day, but he couldn't see that it would be fun trying to make out the landscapes through the drizzle. Driving around in the city traffic wasn't all that much fun either. He was still trying to come up with a destination when he passed a small grocery store set a little back from the side of the road. His stomach growled, reminding him that it was well after lunchtime and he hadn't eaten since breakfast. He pulled off the road so that he could turn around and head back toward it. It had been years since Nick had been inside a little family-owned deli like this. There were a couple of small tables in front of the deli counter. To the side was a small grocery area that provided a small selection of soft drinks, chips, and dessert snacks. It didn't have the variety of products that most convenience stores carried. The overhead fluorescent lights were dim, and one of them flickered. Still, it was a nice, clean little place. The guy behind the counter looked to be only a couple of years younger than Nick. He had a ready smile and wrote down Nick's order: a roast beef sub with the works, plus potato chips and a pickle on a restaurant order pad. Nick watched the man cut the bread in half, slice the meats and cheeses, load it with lettuce, tomatoes, onions, and peppers, before drenching it with oil and vinegar and finally sprinkling spices over it. He put the sandwich on a plate with a handful of chips and laid a pickle beside the sandwich. It looked delicious. Nick grabbed a soda from one of the coolers and paid for his lunch. It had been years since he had eaten a sandwich made like that. He had gotten the full size, only thinking after the fact that he should have gotten the half. The sandwich was more food than he normally ate for lunch. He carried his plate and drink over to one of the tables. It wobbled when he set the plate on it, so he tried one of the other tables. It was solid. "I've been meaning to fix that table," the man behind the counter said. "It should just take a minute to fix." "What's the problem?" "Parts. I can't get the little foot that screws into the bottom to level it." "That's not a problem. You get a good long bolt that's the right diameter, and if you can't find one with the right thread, tap the holder to fit it. It won't be pretty, but it'll keep the table from wobbling," Nick said. To keep the head of the bolt from scratching the floor, he recommended using the plastic top from a soda bottle as a cap on the bolt. No one ever looked under the table to see what made it stable, they only looked when it wobbled. I don't have the tools for that, the man said. I bet you've got a lot of construction crews that pick up lunches here. I'm sure one of the guys has the parts and the tools in the back of his truck. Offer him a sandwich if he'll fix it for you, Nick said. You seem to know how to do these things. Could you do it? Actually, I would probably hurt myself if I tried. I'm not all that good with tools. What do you do for a living? I manage properties for people who are too busy to manage them themselves, Nick answered, gesturing to the table. I run into a lot of nuisance stuff like that table over there. It costs too much to replace, but you can't get the correct parts to fix it properly. I've got a fellow that I use who is a shade tree mechanic at heart. Jed can patch up most things like that in a minute. I would say he's a handy fellow to have around. I'm not all that mechanically inclined, the man said. Nick said, I could send him around here. I'm sure that in less than an hour, he'd have that table fixed, the fluorescent light replaced, and the cooler over there leveled. How much would that cost? You'd have to work that out with him, Nick said. If you could send him over here one afternoon, I would be most appreciative, the man said. He'll do that. I figure this is a win-win situation. You need stuff fixed, and he needs a little work. Nick took a bite out of his sandwich. It tasted as good as it looked. The crust of the bread had just the right amount of hardness, while the interior of the bun had a great texture. The ingredients were fresh and flavorful. The vinegar and oil had covered the lettuce, tomatoes, and onions without soaking into the bun. He was definitely going to come back here. He ate his sandwich, watching the owner at work. A few customers came in and purchased sodas and snacks from the market side of the store. It wasn't very busy, not like a corner convenience store, he imagined, and the guy had plenty of business around lunchtime, particularly during the work week. Between customers, the man spent his time cleaning up the place. It wasn't an overt kind of scrubbing, but an easy wipe of his washcloth here and there while he did other things. There was no buildup of dirt or grime anywhere that required a rigorous application of elbow grease to remove it. Watching him at work, it was obvious that the man took more than a bit of pride in ownership. Nick finished the sandwich, surprised that he had managed to eat it all, and sat back with a satisfied groan. That was good. Thank you. It's pretty hard to go wrong with a roast beef sub, the man said. I've gone to that big chain, and I'm often disappointed. That's a chain. You've got to expect that. I guess so. How long have you owned this place? My dad opened this place when I was a little kid. I took it over when he retired Savino. It's 8 years ago. Wow, you don't see many businesses getting handed down from father to son like that anymore, Nick said. Dad had dreams of me going off to college and becoming an engineer. I think he was kind of disappointed that I wanted to work with him. Why would he be disappointed? He's kind of old world, from the old country. He opened this place to provide for his family after immigrating here. I think he wanted a better future for his son than being a shopkeeper. What country did he come from? Hungary. He got out after the Russians invaded Budapest back in 1956. My dad really hated the Russians and communism. He was one of the students who had been protesting communism and helped bring down the government in the revolution. In fact, he was the organizer of a pedophile circle. What's that? Nick asked. A pedophile circle was what they called a group of students who would meet regularly to discuss politics. In particular, they were incensed by the creation of the Warsaw Pact, which basically annexed Poland and the Eastern European countries as satellite countries to the Soviet Union. Those circles formed the core of the protesters who marched on Parliament and ultimately brought down the government. I don't know much about that time in history, Nick said. It was a big deal in its day, the man said. I can imagine. By the way, my name is Nick. I'm Andres. Andres, that's an unusual name. My dad named me after Andres Hegedus. He was the prime minister of the provisional government that was established after the fall of the Soviet-backed government. He was kind of a moderate and respected by just about everyone. My dad was one of those who felt that Hegedus hadn't gone far enough when setting up the provisional government, but appreciated that he had taken it in the right direction. Hegedus was moving the country toward a multi-party political system and announced that Hungary had withdrawn from the Warsaw Pact. It was a move that cost him his life through an act of treachery. Hegedus was killed by the Soviets after they invaded Hungary. They promised him safe passage and then didn't let him pass. Sounds like he was a brave man, Nick said. I don't know. My dad spoke well of the man, but he didn't know him. Nick and Andres talked about history between the infrequent customers. Nick ended up spending an hour just talking. It was a very pleasant time. It wasn't until Nick was driving home that he realized he was feeling pretty good. That sense of unease had backed off a bit. He didn't know what to make of it, but he liked how he was feeling. Andres had been an interesting person, and it had been a nice little chat. It had killed an hour and a half of what had been a long and boring Saturday. He returned to the house, forgetting that he had purchased the stereo system. He left it in the car. He stopped in the living room to let Laura know that he had returned. Looking as if she hadn't moved an inch from when he had left earlier, Laura was still reading her book on her e-reader. She didn't bother to look up when he entered the room. "I'm back." Laura tore her eyes away from her book. "Oh, you're back. That's what I just said. There are sandwich makings in the kitchen in case you're hungry." "I ate already," Nick said. "That's nice. There's sandwich makings in the kitchen in case you're hungry." Dismissing him, Laura returned to reading her book. Maybe her book was just so interesting that she was lost in reading it. It had been a long time since Head found a book that engaging. Nick stood there, looking at her while she appeared to be oblivious to his presence. This awkward exchange had basically summed up their relationship. Nick wandered through the house looking for something to do. The quiet in the house was almost oppressive. Perhaps it was the thin layer of dust that dampened the noise. Even the little sounds that a house makes, the fan of the heater, the low mumble of the refrigerator, and the moans and groans of the house settling, sounded muted. There wasn't the drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet, as Head had Jed fixed that months ago. It took about 5 minutes to remember that he had a stereo system in the car. He hauled it in and went through the process of setting it up. The first thing he did while unpacking the stereo was to set the directions aside where they could be safely ignored. Of course, the instructions were unnecessary, and considering how small the print was, unreadable. All he had to do was plug in the speakers and then plug the stereo into the wall socket. The total time required was less than it took to retrieve the box from the car. He turned on the stereo and found a classic rock station. A slight adjustment to the volume and music filled the room. At least the oppressive silence was gone. "Is Ella home?" Laura asked from behind him. "No." "Oh, I heard the music and thought she was here." "Not here," Nick said. "Okay," Laura said, and she returned to the living room. Nick watched her walk off, puzzled by her behavior. That uneasy feeling returned full force. He didn't know what to make of it. He shrugged it off and went over to the computer. He spent the next hour reading what he could about the Soviet invasion of Hungary. It was kind of interesting how few names were mentioned. It was as if people like Andres' father didn't really contribute to what was a historic event. A few leaders within the interim government were mentioned, but that was about it. He did read a bit about Andres Hegedus. His cell phone rang. A coffee shop in one of the office buildings he managed had a water leak. According to the caller, water had spread into an adjacent office and through the building lobby. The water had been turned off, but he was needed down at the building to decide what to do about the damage. Little disasters like this didn't happen frequently, but when they did, he had to respond. "Laura, I'm heading to the Crescent building. There's a water leak I've got to check out," Nick said while patting his pockets to make sure that he had everything he needed. "They'll save dinner for you." "Thanks," Nick said. Facing what felt like a never-ending drizzle, Nick drove off to the office building with his thoughts on what kind of mess he would find once he arrived. His imagination didn't do justice to it. The pipe had sprung a leak the previous evening and had been dumping water onto the floor for nearly 12 hours. It was so bad that water had been running out the front door of the building. In the drizzle, the trickle of water under the door wasn't even noticeable. He spent time on site with the phone to his ear. First, he contacted a water damage company to come out and deal with the water. It was necessary to get the water removed before it caused more problems. The last thing he wanted was mold and mildew fixing that would cost a fortune. He knew the folks would show up with the equipment to get up as much water as possible, and then dryers would be used to get rid of the dampness. They'd be pulling water out of the place for the next 24 hours based on how much was there. After he had arranged for the water damage company to come, he called in a plumber to take care of the water leak. The water had been shut off, but an office building could not run without water. The owner of the coffee shop would want to open on Tuesday morning, and that wouldn't happen without water. He then called the owners of the businesses on the first floor and requested them to come out to assess the damage to their businesses. For the next couple of hours, he was dealing with angry and upset businessmen. In the midst of all of that, he spent a great deal of time dealing with the insurance company. It was not a very pleasant afternoon and evening. It was well after 9 at night before he was able to head home. He passed a restaurant on the way home. He considered pulling in for a meal, then remembered that Laura had promised to leave something for him to eat. Pulling into the driveway, he could see that the house was dark. He knew it meant that his wife had already gone to bed. She had been getting up late and going to bed early a lot lately. He entered and went into the kitchen to discover a plate full of some kind of casserole on the counter. He poked at it, trying to figure it out before deciding it was some kind of beef and noodle dish. He looked at the unappetizing meal, wishing that he had given in to the impulse to stop somewhere on the way home for something a little better. It was too late now. He popped it into the microwave and waited for it to heat. He sat on the bar stool at the kitchen counter and ate his dinner. It was a rather bland meal but filling. There had been a lot of it on the plate. He ate as much as he could. He still left a lot on the plate. He emptied the leftovers into the trash can and rinsed off the plate. He didn't know if she had run the dishwasher, so he left it in the sink. After all the hassles of dealing with the water leak, he wanted to relax a bit before heading to bed. He debated between taking a headache pill or having a drink before deciding to make a simple whiskey on the rocks. Carrying his drink, he went into the living room and sat down in a chair. The house was quiet, oppressively so. He sipped his drink, thinking about his day. The trip to the shopping center wasn't exactly how Head wanted to spend a Saturday morning. The lunchtime conversation with Andres had been fascinating, but the guy was just a person he had met. Although the water leak had consumed a lot of his time, it was work and not relaxing. All in all, it was a pretty bad day. He hoped tomorrow would be better. His thoughts turned to what had to be done the next day. He would have to run by the Crescent building to see how things were progressing on the cleanup. He wasn't looking forward to Tuesday morning, when all the people working in the building would come to work to find everything was a mess. He was left with a sense of unease, as if something in his world wasn't right. He couldn't place his finger on it, but some horrible thing was niggling at the back of his mind. He finished his drink and sat there, staring off into space. He fell asleep in the chair, woke around 2:30 in the morning, and made his way to bed. The next afternoon, Nick returned from the Crescent building, feeling confident that things would be back to normal there in a day or two. The water had been removed, and the dryers were doing their job. It would take some time for the offices with carpets to dry out, but the tile floors in the lobby area were dry. People would be able to come into the building and get to the offices on the upper floors. The office next to the coffee shop would be out of business for a day since the carpets in it had been totally soaked. He pulled into the driveway, taking note of Ella's car sitting there. He entered the house to find Laura and Ella chatting at the dining room table. The remains of some pastries were scattered around the table, but he noticed that there was nothing left for him. They had coffee cups that were half full, but it looked like they hadn't been touched in a while. It looked like the two women had been there for several hours at the least. "Hello, Ella. Are you enjoying independent life?" Nick asked. "I love it," Ella said. "That's great," Nick said. "So," when interrupting, Laura asked, "are you sure you can't stay for dinner?" "I'm positive. I can broil some chicken breasts," Laura said. Ella looked tempted but replied, "That sounds good, but I've really got to go." "I would really love it if you stayed," Laura said, rising from the table. Ella said, "I would better go." Laura rose and followed Ella out of the dining room, talking about future shopping trips, leaving Nick standing there with nothing better to do. He picked up the assorted dishes on the table and carried them into the kitchen. He returned with a wet rag and wiped up the crumbs. After pushing the chairs in, he went into the kitchen to take care of the few dishes. When he returned to the living room, Laura was back to reading her book. "She left?" "Yes. She didn't say goodbye," Nick said, hurt by his daughter's behavior. "I'm trying to read." "I can see that," Nick said. Laura looked back down at her e-reader. "I got out the chicken," Nick said. "We're just having leftover casserole," Laura said. "I heard you say that you'd make broiled chicken tonight. We're having the leftover casserole now. If you excuse me, I want to finish this book," Laura said firmly in her "don't argue with me" tone of voice. "Excuse me," Nick said, feeling angry at being ignored. He turned and walked out of the house. Once again, he was left with nowhere to go. After thinking about it for a minute, He smiled before pulling out of the driveway and heading away from the house. It was a short drive to the restaurant. He went inside like a man on a mission. It was early, and the restaurant was practically empty. The hostess, after leading him over to a table, handed him a menu. He glanced over it, smiled, and then said, "I know exactly what I want." "Your waiter will be right with you," the hostess said before leaving the table. Nick watched her walk away, appreciating the nice roll of her hips as she moved. He sighed. Although Nick knew exactly what he wanted to eat, he glanced over the menu while waiting for the waiter to arrive. The Chesapeake Bay Grill was one of his favorite restaurants. It was normally too expensive for him, except on special occasions. It wasn't the most expensive place in town, but he felt that it was one of the best places to eat in terms of food. The waiter arrived and said, "Good evening, sir. My name is David, and I'll be your waiter tonight." The hostess said that you already knew what you wanted to order. "That's right. I'll have the broiled chicken with lemon garlic sauce and a glass of the house Merlot," Nick answered. He had selected the only broiled chicken dish on the menu. It came with roasted potatoes and steamed asparagus. Normally, Nick didn't like steamed asparagus, finding that it was usually just tough little things with almost no flavor. The chef at the Chesapeake Bay Grill managed to do something Nick didn't know what he did to the asparagus that made it Nick's favorite side at the restaurant. The roasted potatoes they served there weren't bad either. "Would you prefer the Caesar salad or the spinach salad?" "The spinach salad," Nick said. "Would you care for any appetizers?" "No, thank you." Nick handed the menu to the waiter. "I'll be right back with your wine, sir." "Thank you." It wasn't long before his meal started to arrive. Nick proceeded to enjoy every bite of food. The wine had 2 glasses was excellent. The hot bread slathered with a thick coat of soft butter melted in his mouth. The spinach in the salad had to be the most tender leaves of spinach he had ever tasted. The dressing. He didn't know what kind it was, had a delightful citrus flavor to it. The main dish surpassed his expectations. For dessert, he had coffee and a slice of chocolate cheesecake. After he had finished eating, he relaxed, sipping his coffee and looking around at the others enjoying their meals. He watched a young couple, clearly in love, eating their meal. They were so lost in looking at each other that he doubted they even knew what they were eating. He remembered when he and Laura were like that. They had been seniors in college when they had met and begun the process of falling in love while taking an anthropology class. He was a business major taking the course as a general elective, and she was a history major taking it as a required course. Her father often joked that there were no jobs for historians and that she was actually working on what he called an MRS degree rather than a Bachelor of Arts degree. Her father had an odd sense of humor that Nick had slowly learned to appreciate. Being college students, money for dates had been a problem, but it wasn't insurmountable. The early dates had them attending university events, with them going to movie presentations on campus, special lectures hosted by various departments, and other campus-based activities. They studied side by side in the library, ate together in the cafeteria, and necked in little isolated corners of the campus. It really didn't matter what they did, they only had eyes for each other. It was a time of excitement in which they nervously expanded the boundaries of their budding relationship and explored their sexuality. By the time they graduated, they were in love, and a few months later, they were married. Nick glanced back at the loving couple sharing their meal and then at the empty chair across the table. Understanding what had been eating at him crashed down upon him. He now knew what had been bothering him. It wasn't that the house was too quiet, it was that the house was too empty. With the children gone, all emotions seemed to have evaporated. He wondered what had happened to the couple he and his wife had once been. Is this a midlife crisis? He wondered. The idea of going out and buying a sports car wasn't all that attractive to him. He hadn't ever been out cruising for a mistress. That didn't mean that he didn't check out the women, just that the thought of pursuing one had never crossed his mind. He was married to Laura and hadn't seen any reason to chase after women. All of a sudden, he felt trapped in an empty marriage. What unnerved him in pursuing that thought was that he suddenly had a reason to chase after women. He nearly spilled his coffee when that thought crossed his mind. The waiter brought the bill over to the table. Nick paid it without really looking at the amount. If asked later, he would have had no idea how much he had spent on the meal. His mind was on other, more important matters. Nick drove toward his house. He didn't drive directly home, but stopped along the way at little stores to make a few purchases. Feeling a slight headache, He stopped at a pharmacy and bought a bottle of aspirin. Noticing that his gas tank was nearly half empty, he stopped at the gas station and put 30 worth of gasoline in his car. His mouth was a little dry, so he stopped at a convenience store and bought a cup of coffee. It was only when he was pulling into a second convenience store to buy a newspaper that he realized what he was doing was avoiding going home. He entered the house and made his way into the kitchen. It appeared that his wife hadn't been in there. The chicken he had set out to thaw was still on the counter. The dirty dishes he had stacked in the sink hadn't been put in the dishwasher. He wondered if she had waited for him or hadn't gotten around to making dinner. He wondered if she had even noticed if he had left the house. He went into the living room. Laura was still seated where she had been when he had left. Her eyes were still glued to the e-reader. "Laura." She looked up and said, "I'll reheat the casserole after I finish this chapter." A sudden rage welled up inside Nick. He grabbed the e-reader from her hand and threw it like a frisbee. It sailed across the room and hit the wall edging, leaving a dent before falling to the floor. Laura, shocked and speechless, stared at him open-mouthed. "You're done with that goddamn chapter," Nick shouted. Laura just sat there, staring at him. She hadn't seen him this angry since catching a boy making out with Ella in the living room. The boy had been lucky to leave the house with all of his body parts, much less his life. Thinking she would placate him, she said, "Okay, I'll put the casserole in the microwave now. You can take that casserole and shove it up your butt." Realizing that he was about to lose it, Nick stormed out of the house before he said something he would regret. Laura, caught completely by surprise, broke out in tears. Tuesday morning, Laura woke at least for her feeling like she had the flu. Her nose was stuffed, her eyes were red, her body hurt, and she felt groggy. She had not slept well at all. She had lain in her bed crying for hours before falling asleep. After an hour of sleep, she'd wake and see the empty side of the bed. She'd burst into tears, crying herself to sleep again. It was a cycle that repeated throughout the night. She glanced at the empty place on Nick's side of the bed and broke out in tears once again. She couldn't believe that he hadn't returned the previous night. She wondered if he would ever return home again. She wished she knew what she had done wrong to anger him so much. The previous night had been a nightmare. In all the years she had known him, he had never talked to her like that. Maybe it wasn't the best casserole she had ever made, but to tell her to stuff it up her butt? She had cried after he left. After collecting her thoughts, she waited for him to return and apologize to her. When 11 had come around, she thought that maybe he had gone to a bar to have a drink and calm down. She had tried calling him to tell him to take a cab home. He had ignored her calls. By midnight, she was worried that he had gotten into an accident. She had visions of him lying in a ditch injured and bleeding. She was still at a loss as to why he had acted the way he had. Losing his temper like that was so unlike him. Even in the worst situations, he was an island of calm. He had no reason to be angry with her. She was sure she had done nothing to make him mad. She put on her robe and went down to the kitchen. Acting on autopilot, she made a pot of coffee. While it was brewing, she dialed his cell phone again. It rang 3 times and then went to voicemail. It was obvious he was intentionally not answering it. He lived with his cell phone at hand at all times. It seldom rang more than once before he was answering it. If he wasn't answering, it was because he didn't want to talk to her. She poured a cup of coffee and went into the living room. The battered e-reader was on the coffee table where she had put it the previous night. It was only while reaching for it that she remembered that it no longer worked. She was thinking that she'd have to go to the store and buy a replacement. It was while staring at the e-reader that she noticed something disturbing. The coffee table had a coat of dust on it. Shocked, she looked around at the rest of the room. Everything had a coat of dust on it. The carpet was dull and looked like it hadn't been vacuumed in months. Getting up, she walked around the house. There was a stack of dirty laundry in the bedroom. The sheets on their bed looked dirty. She looked in his closet. He had clean shirts hanging crookedly on hangers, but they were wrinkled as if someone hadn't taken them out of the dryer in time to hang them up before the wrinkles set in. She realized that he must have washed and dried them sometime in the past. The only room that looked halfway clean was the kitchen, although the floor could have used cleaning. Every night, Nick cleared the table and washed the dishes, feeling like it was his contribution to the housework. He was one of those rare husbands who understood that taking care of 2 kids and keeping up a house was a full-time job. When the kids were babies, he got into the habit of cleaning up after dinner so that she would have a little time to relax. It was a gesture she had initially appreciated, then took for granted, and finally had come to ignore. Although the entire house was a mess, it was in the bathroom where she nearly had a breakdown. The shower walls had patches of black and orange from mold and mildew, except for a round spot in the middle. The mirror over the sink had such a thick film on it that it was hard to see herself in it. There were little stains all over the sink and counter area. Horrified by what she was seeing, she said, "My God." She didn't even want to look at the toilet. She opened the lid and looked inside, expecting to find a ring in the toilet bowl. Much to her surprise, it was relatively clean. It took a moment for it to dawn on her that every time Nick took a piss, he was looking into the toilet. He must have gotten disgusted by its appearance at some point in time and cleaned it. Walking like a drunk, she staggered into the living room. She had hardly settled into her chair when the doorbell rang. She went to it with a sick feeling in her stomach. She halfway expected to find some man there, ready to hand her divorce papers. Opening the door, she found herself facing 3 women holding house-cleaning supplies. In a thick Spanish accent that was difficult to understand, one of the women said, "We're here from the Sunrise Maid Services." If Nick's disappearance from the house the previous evening had been a blow to the stomach, this was a kidney punch. She knew how Nick operated. When he had a problem, he called the appropriate people to come in and take care of it. He didn't even have to think about it, just did it. It was a mode of operation that had made him a successful man. Stunned that he would call a service to clean her house, she backed away from the door to let them in. The 3 women entered the house and looked around. The expression of disdain on the women's faces let her know exactly what they thought of her housekeeping abilities. Embarrassed, she mumbled, "Take care of the living room, dining room, kitchen, and bathrooms." The woman who had greeted her turned to the other 2 women and rattled off instructions in Spanish. It took only a few seconds before all of them were busy cleaning the house. Watching them, Laura knew that even on her best day, she would never have attacked the work with that much energy. She figured that it would take her days to get done what the 3 women would do in the next few hours. Laura, near tears, went into the bedroom to get dressed. She wasn't comfortable with the idea of walking around wearing her nightgown and a light robe with a bunch of strangers in the house. She grabbed the first clothes that she found. She didn't notice, but they were the clothes she had been wearing the day before. Once she was dressed, she headed towards the laundry, carrying a load of shirts. Rather than endure the humiliation of watching the women clean her house, she would wash the dirty clothes. While the first load of clothes was washing, she went into the bedroom and started straightening it up. The sound of the vacuum cleaner echoing in the halls sounded like derisive laughter to her ears. She hoped that her children didn't stop by and see what was happening. She'd be mortified. She had always prided herself on being a good housekeeper. She had just stripped the sheets off the bed when the doorbell rang again. She went to the door and found 2 men standing there. "We're from All-Star Blind and Curtain Cleaners." "Oh," Laura said. She stepped back and let them in the house. "Our work order says that we're to clean the curtains from the living room, dining room, kitchen, and 3 bedrooms." "That's right," Laura said, barely able to get the words out of her mouth. She watched them remove the curtains from the large living room window and put them into bags. She wanted to crawl into a gutter when one of the maids smirked at her after pulling a dirty plate out from under the couch. Laura had no idea how it had gotten there or how long it had been there. Rather than face the maids, she returned to the bedroom. There was enough to be done in there to keep her busy for the whole day. She had barely gotten her hands on the sheets when the doorbell rang again. She stormed through the house and to the door. She opened it to find a small man standing there holding a milk crate filled with tools. He smiled at her. In a thick Eastern European accent that she had never figured out where it came from, he said, "Hello, Mrs. Laura. I'm Jed. Mr. Nick sent me over to patch the wall." "Come in, Jed," Laura said. Jed had been doing odd jobs around the house for more years than she could count. "Thank you, Mrs. Laura. You can just call me Laura." "Yes, Mrs. Laura," Jed said with a smile. She took him into the living room and pointed out where the e-reader had hit the wall. Jed smiled at her and then went to work. She headed back to the bedroom, knowing that Jed was one of Nick's trusted contacts who fixed things that broke. He would show up with his milk crate filled with tools and fix things. She had just gotten the sheets off the bed when there was a knock on the frame of the bedroom door. Irritated at another interruption, she looked over at the man standing there. He shifted uneasily before he said, "I need to get the curtains." "Take them," Laura said. The man went over to the window and started taking down the curtains. "It's going to be a long day," Laura said with a sigh. "You're really cleaning up the place," the man said, thinking she was talking about all the activity taking place in the house. "Yes," Laura said in a flat voice. "Are you expecting company?" the man asked. "No. I guess you're selling the house then," the man said. "No," Laura replied sharply, taken aback by the suggestion. "I didn't mean to suggest anything. We don't do much residential work. When we do, it's usually just before visits from in-laws, weddings, or when someone is selling a house." "It's just my husband making a point," Laura said with a sigh. She glanced at the clock by the bed and saw that it was only 10:30. She wondered who would be showing up next. She had a feeling that by the end of the day, she was going to know exactly why Nick was so angry at her. She was terrified that her education had only just begun. "This is the last of the curtains. We'll be back this afternoon with them cleaned." "Thank you," Laura said. Laura managed to get the sheets into the washing machine before the doorbell rang again. She came out and answered the door. "Hello. I'm Kevin from Home Plate Meals." "Home Plate Meals?" Laura asked numbly. "We're a catering service. We prepare meals in advance for busy people. We come to your house and cook the meals, then we put them into your freezer so that they can be reheated," Kevin said. "That's convenient," Laura said, trying hard not to scream at the man. "Mr. Morgan hired me to prepare 2 weeks' worth of meals." "Come in, Kevin," Laura said, staring at the floor, feeling defeated. "I need to bring in the food in my pots and pans." "Take your time," Laura said. She had gotten Nick's message loud and clear. Not only was she a bad housekeeper, but she was worthless in the kitchen. She tried to think of what she had cooked over the past few months, but couldn't remember. No wonder Nick had gotten angry when she refused to cook the broiled chicken. He had just been looking forward to a decent meal for a change. The curtain men left with bags full of curtains, promising to return later that afternoon. Jed had patched the wall, and then disappeared out the front door without saying a word. The maids finished cleaning the house a little after 2 and departed. The cook remained in the kitchen until nearly 3, performing the magic of turning fresh food into hot meals. She had eaten a sandwich for lunch while watching him prepare some very good-looking and very healthy dishes. It was almost a shame to see his creations go into the freezer. The aroma was incredible. There had been a time when the aroma of her cooking had filled the air. In the middle of the afternoon, she was convinced that she had received all of her surprise visitors when, much to her horror, a window washer had shown up on the doorstep and had then taken care of the windows. He had done the inside and outside. She had stood there watching him work. He made quick work of each window. He did the whole house in less time than she would have taken to do 3 windows. Shortly after the window washer had left, the men from the curtain cleaners returned. Under her guidance, they rehung the curtains. She had to admit that they looked a whole lot nicer now. She had almost forgotten what colors they were. It took them an hour to get all the window treatments back in place. The hours of the day had passed slowly, despite how busy it had been. Despite all the interruptions, she had managed to clean the bedroom and take care of the laundry. The broken aerator and the chicken breast that Nick had put out on the counter the previous night had ended up in the trash can, the aerator by her, and the chicken by the chef. He had taken one sniff of it and had made a face of disgust. He had then attacked the whole counter with a bleach and water solution. She looked at the clock. She didn't expect her husband to be home for another hour, that is, if he was even going to come home that evening. She walked around the house, inspecting the work that had been performed. She had to admit that it looked a whole lot different than it had that morning. The wood was polished, the floors were clean, the bathroom shined, and even the windows had been washed. Although the pantry remained empty, the freezer was filled with food. There was a salad with grilled shrimp in the refrigerator for that evening. It had only taken 7 people the whole day to accomplish it. The doorbell rang. Dreading what she would find upon answering it, she made her way to the door. Nick had enough time to visit a lawyer and file for a divorce. She hoped that she wasn't about to be served with divorce papers. A very young and very attractive woman was standing there. Laura stared at the woman, thinking she looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place where she had met the woman. The woman looked surprised to see Laura. After taking a moment to regain her composure, the woman asked, "Is Nick Morgan here?" "Nick?" Laura asked. "Is that what he goes by?" "That's the name he gave me," the woman answered. "I don't expect him home for another half hour," Laura said, feeling a really bad feeling about this. The woman looked like a sex goddess. Laura was frantically trying to remember when she had last had sex with Nick. She couldn't remember. There was no way he could have done something as horrible as sending a hooker to the house. No, he couldn't have. "Would you mind if I come inside and wait for him?" the woman asked. "What is your business with Nick?" Laura asked with a definite chill in her voice. The woman said, "Maybe that's not such a good idea. I know this is a little awkward, but I didn't expect his wife to be here." "Wife?" Laura asked, getting angry. "I should probably come back when he gets home," the woman said. "That might be a very good idea." The woman handed Laura a business card and said, "Have him call me when he gets here." Laura glanced down at the card. It said the woman was Candy Lane from Lane Escort Service. She had to read it twice because she hadn't believed it the first time. This was really a low blow. After all of the insults of the day, Laura lost it. In a shrill voice that carried 2 blocks, Laura screamed, "Get the hell out of here. If you come back, they'll rip your silicone implants right off of your chest and feed them to you." The woman backed away before turning to head for her car. Laura, snorting like a bull about to charge, watched the woman drive away. She swore the woman was laughing at her. She sent a one-finger salute at the woman before storming into the house and slamming the door shut. Fists clenched, she screamed, "I'm going to kill that son of a..." She stormed around the house, wanting to throw something. Every once in a while, she would stop and scream out her frustration at the top of her lungs. Without saying a single word to her, Nick had let her know that she was a lousy housekeeper, a lousy cook, and a lousy lover. What really hurt was that she hadn't had a chance to argue or deny the charges. He had proven his point. Energy expended, she collapsed on the couch to wait for him to come home. She wasn't aware of the tears running down her cheeks. Feeling a little calmer, she tried to remember where she had met that woman, but it just wouldn't come to her. She heard the front door open and close. Working up her temper, she waited for him, ready to let him have both barrels. He entered the living room carrying his dry cleaning. She stared at the clothes, feeling her anger slip away from her. Had she sunk so low that Head had to run all of the errands as well? Sadly, the answer was in his hand. Feeling defeated, she said, "I got the message loud and clear. I've been a lousy housekeeper, cook, and lover." "Laura," Nick asked, "do we need to see a marriage counselor?" "I don't know," she answered. The thought of a marriage counselor had never crossed her mind. Of course, she hadn't thought about the state of their marriage until last night when Nick had walked out of the house. It wasn't that she believed they had a good marriage, she just hadn't thought about it at all for years. Her energy was directed at raising the kids, and somehow Nick had just become an afterthought. With the kids gone, Nick had remained an afterthought. "Let me hang up my dry cleaning," he said, lifting the clothes to emphasize the need to put them away. "Go ahead. Would you like me to fix you a drink?" Laura asked, surprised by the offer. He answered, "Yes, that would be nice." While he was gone, she made a whiskey on the rocks for him, thankful that he was a man of simple tastes. After a couple of minutes, Nick, having changed out of his clothes, returned to the living room. She handed him the drink. Curiosity forced her to ask, "Who was she?" "Who?" Nick asked. "Candy Lane. I know her from somewhere." Nick chuckled, earning a dirty look from his wife. "Kathy Longstreet. You know her. She's the manager over at the Milltown Apartments." "I knew I recognized her." Laura fumed. She knew that he couldn't have chosen a better woman to play the part of an escort. Although Kathy was young and beautiful, she also posed no threat to Laura's relationship with Nick. Kathy was a lesbian with no interest in men at all. If anyone had to worry about being pursued by Kathy, it was Laura. "I'm sure you would have recognized her, girlfriend." "Oh God, don't even bring that up," Laura said with a grimace. At the last Christmas party, Kathy's girlfriend had joked several times about taking Laura to one of the back rooms to teach her love. Laura had not been amused when the woman had run a hand over her. Embarrassed, Kathy had dragged her drunken lover away from the party after apologizing profusely. Nick said, "We had a bit of fun coming up with a fake name for her." Not wanting to hear that he had fun planning her humiliation, she asked, "Why don't you enjoy your drink while I get dinner ready?" "Okay," Nick said before taking a sip of his whiskey. He watched her walk into the kitchen. The house was still too quiet, so he turned on the stereo. He searched for a station until he found one that played classical music. He wanted soft background music rather than classic rock. He sat down on the sofa and thought about Laura's appearance. He had expected her to be a little better dressed, particularly after Kathy's visit. The fact was that she looked horrible, and he knew it was his doing. She looked exhausted. Her face was puffy from crying. She was wearing the same clothes that she had worn the day before, and her hair was a mess. He wondered if she had even brushed it that morning. He knew all about being tired. He had spent a sleepless night in a dump of a motel, wondering how he could fix things at home. He knew that talking wasn't a solution. She was a proud woman and would have been defensive in response to anything he could have said. Nothing would have been accomplished except for hurt feelings after a lot of yelling and screaming, in which each would have said something that couldn't be taken back. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that he had come up with a plan. After a night of almost no sleep, he had a busy day ahead of him. A good part of the morning was spent putting his plan into action while having to deal with the mess at the Crescent Building. In addition, he had to run by the Milltown apartments to meet with contractors who were bidding on reshingling the roof of one of the apartment buildings. He took another sip of his drink, unable to hold it back. He yawned. Lack of sleep, coming down from intense emotions, and the whiskey were combining to make him sleepy. "Dinner is ready," Laura called out. Carrying the rest of his drink with him, Nick went into the dining room. She had put out the nicest table setting they had for a change. The salad with grilled shrimp looked excellent. There was a glass of orange juice, which he assumed was a screwdriver, at her place setting. They looked across the table at each other, not knowing what to say. Finally, Laura said, "Bon appetit." "Same to you," Nick said. They both tried the salad. It was as tasty as it had looked. They ate without talking. Nick didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like gloating. He couldn't even compliment the quality of the meal after all. She hadn't made it. Her pride wasn't going to let her praise a total stranger for a meal created in her kitchen. The silence hung in the air, forcing each of them to think about their situation. Nick had made his point, and felt he had to sit back to see if she had gotten it. Laura had begun to see just how bad things had been for Nick. After finishing her meal, Laura grabbed their glasses and went into the kitchen. She returned after a minute with both glasses refilled. Her orange juice looked like it had been diluted with a substantial quantity of vodka. His whiskey on the rocks was mostly whiskey and very few rocks. While setting his whiskey in front of him, she said, "I feel like I'm supposed to drag you off to the bedroom and let you know how much I love you, but I'm really too tired to do that. I know I would just lie there like a rug. To tell the truth, I'm so tired. I'm not sure I could perform." Nick admitted he definitely was going to have a problem staying awake if he drank that second whiskey. The events of the last 24 hours were really beginning to catch up with him. Laura said, "I think I'll call a marriage counselor tomorrow and set up an appointment. I'm not dealing too well with the kids leaving the house." "I think that is a good idea," Nick said, pleased that she was making an effort to rebuild the relationship. Laura said, "Why don't you take your drink into the living room while I clear the table?" "I usually do the dishes," Nick said. "It's my turn tonight," Laura said. She didn't need another reminder that she was doing nothing around the house. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. You've been doing too much of the work around the house lately." Nick went into the living room and looked at his e-reader. Normally, had spent a little time reading a newspaper on it. It was the only way he could keep up with current events. Tonight, he didn't want to touch it, much less read anything on it. In the kitchen, Laura was rinsing off the dishes and thinking about what had to be done tomorrow. One of the first things she was going to do was go grocery shopping. She had been buying junky, quick-to-fix meals for too long. It wasn't right that they should be eating casseroles from a box, boiling bag meals, and microwave dinners. It was time that she started cooking real meals again, food that filled the air with an aroma that increased the appetite and made eating a pleasure. The house wasn't the only thing she had let slide. Her appearance had really gone to hell, and she knew it. She was going to hit a beauty parlor and do something with her hair. She decided that she'd get her nails done while she was at it. She'd also get a new dress. There was no reason for her to be walking around looking like Mrs. Disaster Area, without any pots or pans to clean, It didn't take long for her to finish the dishes. She joined Nick in the living room. She noticed the music for the first time. She was about to comment on the music when Nick said, "I talked to an interesting fellow Saturday." Interesting in what way? His father was a revolutionary in the Hungarian Revolution and had to flee the country when the Russians invaded. He was telling me about some of the stories his father used to tell him. It was really kind of fascinating to listen to him, even though the stories were secondhand. "I never really studied that period in history," Laura said. "I know you know that happened 55 years ago. The folks who participated in it are now in their 70s and 80s. In a few more years, there won't be anyone alive who was involved in that event." "I never thought about it that way. Why are you so interested in history all of a sudden?" "It's just that it got me to thinking. You majored in history in school, and you're always reading historical novels. Did you ever consider going back to school and picking up a master's in history?" "Not really. I'm kind of old to be going back to school," Laura said, surprised by the suggestion. "You're not old." "Thank you, but I'm not a college kid anymore." "Well, you think about it." He hadn't expected her to immediately agree, but at least he would get her to consider the idea. She had spent the last 24 years as a mother and housewife. With the kids moving out of the house, she had more or less had to retire from the full-time job of being a mother. He thought that going to school would be an attractive option for her. "I will," Laura said. "I am going to start going to a gym to exercise a little. I realized yesterday that I'm a little out of shape. I could afford to lose 20 pounds or so." "I would like to join you," Nick said. She took a big gulp of her screwdriver. After the direct assaults on her recent performance as a wife, she appreciated the way he had gently brought up the need to lose weight. Somehow or another, she had become a total mess over the past few months. She had just slipped into becoming a lazy fat slob without even realizing it. She knew that she needed to lose a lot of weight but had dropped, and a little exercise might tighten it up again. There wasn't too much that she could do with her sagging body, though gravity and time were not a woman's friends. That would be nice. Nick had wanted a nice way to tell her that she needed to lose a little weight and get back in shape. It had dawned on him that rather than criticize her, he should set himself as an example. He knew that he wasn't exactly a poster child of fitness. The events of the past 24 hours hit Laura like a ton of bricks. She visibly sagged. Although she wanted to talk some more, she knew that she'd start babbling soon, particularly after the vodka hit her. She said, "I'm really sorry, but I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a shower and get ready for bed." "I understand," Nick said. "I'm not going to be awake much longer either." He watched her walk toward the hall. He sighed, wondering if things were going to work out between them. He wasn't sure if their marriage was on sound enough footing. At least he had sounded a warning bell that things were not well. He felt that if they both worked at it, they could save the marriage. He was hopeful that the love and passion that had once been theirs could be rekindled. He swallowed the last of his whiskey, rose from the chair, and took the empty glass to the kitchen. He rinsed it out and put it into the dishwasher. The kitchen really looked a whole lot cleaner. He was glad to see that. While closing the dishwasher, he said, "The one great hope of any terrible day is that there's always tomorrow." We'll see what happens tomorrow. In today's video, we followed Nick and Laura as they faced the challenges of an empty nest and conflict in their marriage. Can they find a way to rekindle their love? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I was dressed for work sitting at the breakfast table with my cup of coffee and the morning newspaper. Anna was still in the bedroom dressing for work. There was nothing different about this morning to distinguish it from any of the previous workdays in the past here. As my eyes scanned over the front page, there it was, in the middle of the page. I knew it would be there. Marco told me it would happen last night. Marco never fails to do the things he said he would do. Man found murdered in his garage. The news article went on to say that an Anthony Harrison was found dead in his garage last evening. He had been beaten and then strangled with a garrote. The article said Anthony Harrison was an employee of the Navarra Realty Group. Anna is also employed by the Navarra Realty Group. The police have no suspects at this time. The investigation was just beginning. There was no reason to read any more of the newspaper. I folded it and placed it on the table where Anna always sits in the morning. A sweet, warm feeling washed over me as my mind sorted through all the factors that led up to this morning. I was sipping my coffee as Anna came into the breakfast area. My God, was she beautiful? My wife of 5 years was more stunning today than she was 7 years ago when I first met her. There was no good morning, dear from either of us as she pulled out her chair and poured herself a cup of coffee from the carafe. It's hard to believe just how far our marriage had plummeted in the past year. Our eyes met for a brief second. A slight smile passed my lips as I acknowledged her arrival. She said nothing to me. It had been this way for the past 2 months after the major blowout we had about her increased working hours. She seemed to crawl into her shell and did not wish to come out. I guess her coldness bothered me more than anything else. During our courtship in the early days of our marriage, Anna was such a warm, loving companion. I truly missed that closeness. Now all of that was coming to an end. Anna picked up the paper in one hand, coffee cup in the other hand. Her eyes flashed across the headlines and started down the page. As she took a sip of coffee, all of a sudden, she spewed the coffee from her mouth as her eyes seemed to bulge from their sockets. "Oh God! No!" she cried out, as her eyes were transfixed on the article about Anthony Harrison's murder. I just sat there in silence. There was nothing I needed to say to her about the subject. Anna looked as if she were about to vomit as she quickly rose from her chair and ran to the bathroom. I took a deep breath, got up from my chair, and placed my coffee cup in the dishwasher. With my briefcase in hand, I went out to the garage and got into my car. I didn't care to ask Anna if she were all right. It didn't matter to me anymore how she was feeling. Let me do some introductions at this time. My name is Michael Carlucci. All my friends call me MC. I'm 30 years old and a product of Sicilian ancestry in the Italian section of Rochester, New York. My youth was mostly spent getting in trouble, along with a gang of other young Italian boys. We used to think of ourselves as the junior mafia. We'll skip over most of the other bad stuff we got ourselves into and focus on the one event that had a major change in my wayward direction. Marco Scalisi and I were closer than two natural brothers. We were the same age and hung out with the same gang of guys. The major difference between Marco and me was brain power. I won't say Marco was dumb or anything like that. It was just the fact he couldn't use his head to keep himself out of trouble with the law. Even though he and I did most of the bad stuff together, he was the one who usually got caught by the police. One night, Marco and I had broken into a storage warehouse. We were looking for some easy items to rip off and make some cash for ourselves. The security guards must have seen us entering the building through the side window. They were waiting for us as we slipped back out the window with several boxes of MP3 players in our hands. The one guard grabbed Marco just as I was turning around. The second guard tried to grab me, but I shoved the box into his face. I jumped on the other guard's back and punched him on the side of his head with all my might. He let go of Marco as I pulled him to the ground. I was shouting to Marco to get us out of there as fast as he could. Marco turned and ran off. The second guard recovered and grabbed me from behind. There wasn't much of a struggle after that. The guards had a nice time with me till the cops showed up. When they arrived, they were laughing with the guards as they surveyed my bruised and bloodied body. I was taken to the police station and put in a holding cell until my parents came down to get me released. To make this long story short, I never gave up the name of the other person who was with me in the warehouse. I was given 2 weeks in juvenile detention and put on probation. Marco called me several times to apologize for skipping out when the guards grabbed me. I told him it was all right because if he had been caught with his prior arrest record, he would have spent a year or more in jail. He vowed that he would make it up to me if it took him the rest of his life. My parents were angry and humiliated by my arrest. My dad thrashed my butt with his leather belt until it almost bled. Then they told me they were going to enroll me in St. Mary's Catholic High School because I needed to be straightened out one way or the other. Needless to say, the nuns and priests did a very good job in the discipline department. By my senior year, I had made a change in my lifestyle. One of the priests, who became a mentor for me, encouraged me to take a different path with my life. So it was that I dropped out of the neighborhood gang and finally did well enough that year to get accepted to Syracuse University. Cutting the long story short, I did well in college and graduated with a degree in human resources. It was easy to find a job with a good company upon graduation. For once, my parents were proud of me. Even though I dated a lot of women while I was in college, I wasn't ready for any long-term commitments. It was 3 years after graduating from college when I met Anna Lombardi. She was the first woman who made me think twice about ending my bachelorhood. We met at a seminar for HR representatives. After the seminar, I got her phone number and told her I would call her. She seemed quite pleased with that prospect. Anna was different than any of the other women I had dated. There seemed to be many sides to her personality. At times, Anna seemed like Joan Wilder in the movie Romancing the Stone. The trait I liked the least was Anna's stubborn personality. Whenever Anna took a position about a particular issue, there was no dissuading her from her belief, no matter how wrong that belief might be. Our courtship was an on-again, off-again affair. We never indulged in sexual relations during the first year of our dating. I found out that Anna had been abandoned. As an infant, her mother left her in a pew in the back of a church and walked out of her life. Her early years were spent in a home for orphan children and then in several foster homes as she became a teenager. I firmly believe it was this lack of having a mother to love and care for her that caused most of Anna's personality problems. In spite of all her problems, Anna was the most loving and warm person I had ever known when she was with me during those first years. My parents were not strong supporters of Anna during our dating years. They always told me I would be sorry if I got too involved with her. I didn't listen to their good advice. Anna and I were married in a small ceremony at my local church. We both agreed that we would hold off having children until we were financially established, and she would be able to quit her job and be a full-time mother. That fact did not sit well with my parents. Things began to go sour in our marriage during the third year. The company Anna worked for was bought out by a larger company, and her job was eliminated. She became very depressed by the loss of the job she really liked. We weren't in any financial difficulty, although her salary had been a nice addition to our savings account each month. It took several months before Anna finally landed a new job. It wasn't a job she particularly wanted. The job was office manager at the LaSalle Realty Group. I tried to be overly supportive of Anna during her unemployment period. Sometimes I felt she resented the fact that I had a job I truly enjoyed, and she had to settle for a second-best job. For a long while, she had some serious mood swings, especially during her monthly period. After working at LaSalle for a couple of months, she slowly began to regain her normal, pleasant personality. Things started looking better for both of us. Our sex life, which had suffered badly during Anna's unemployment period, was also on the rebound. There were times in our bedroom when I felt Anna was trying very hard to make up for the rough patch by being more aggressive with her lovemaking. I never complained. For about 9 months, our married life was at its best. Anna became more enthusiastic about her job. She even began a home study course in real estate. I was pleased with the change in her demeanor and the loving wife she was to me. Then came the good news and bad news situation. The good news: I was making a slow but steady progression up the management ladder with my company. I had been with them for 5 years, and my future looked very promising. Then came a merger with a company based in Nashville, Tennessee, which started a major change in my job responsibilities. The Nashville company was to be assimilated into our corporate structure. As such, I would have the responsibility to train their personnel and to make headcount cuts as I saw necessary. I was really pumped up with my new job responsibilities. The bad news: my new assignments would mean I would be traveling out of town more often and for some longer periods away from home. Anna was not thrilled with the prospect of me being on the road so much of my time. Even during the longer periods on the road, I managed to be home for the weekends. At first, this seemed to placate Anna's anger at my being away so much. But, and there always is a but, slowly my coming home for the weekends didn't seem to be enough to make up for the time away from home. Anna moved into her stubborn mindset in which she claimed I was enjoying being away from home and suddenly hinted that I might have a lover who I spent time with in Nashville. Nothing I could do or say could move her away from this negative thinking. I would call her at work during the day and every night when she was at home. I sent flowers to her at work, and I sent her humorous cards over the internet. Her coolness toward me continued. It had taken the better part of 6 months to complete the staff training in Nashville. My days as a road warrior were coming to an end. In addition, I was given a promotion at corporate headquarters. These were 2 things which I felt would cause a turnaround in Anna's attitude toward me. I was wrong. It seemed as soon as I stopped traveling, Anna started working longer hours at the agency. I tried to question her about the reasons for her working hours. She gave me some sarcastic answer about it being her turn to work for a promotion. She even said that it was time for me to know how it felt to be alone in the evenings. Our sex life was running on empty. 2 weeks ago, Anna told me that she and several of the people at her agency would be away for the weekend attending a special introduction session with a developer who was beginning construction of high-rise condominiums near the riverside. She said it was imperative for her to get in on the ground floor with this developer. There was no asking me if it would be all right for her to be gone the entire weekend she was going to go, and that was the end of the discussion. Although I stopped running with the junior mafia when I was in high school, I did keep in touch with several of my closest friends, especially my buddy Marco. I called him up and asked him if he wanted to see the Giants versus Ravens game on Sunday. There wasn't any hesitation in his voice way we're going to the game. Marco always knew how to get the best tickets to the Giants games. I told him Anna would be away on business on Saturday and Sunday. He then told me to plan to spend the weekend with him and the boys. We could catch up on all the happenings in the old neighborhood. The thought of a weekend away from home and wife sounded really great to me. I didn't bother to tell Anna of my plans. Friday morning had been another chilly event for us around the breakfast table. I briefly asked Anna if she had a phone number where I could reach her while she was gone. She very coolly told me not to bother to call her while she was gone because she would be with some very influential people, and taking phone calls from her husband would make her feel like I was a father checking up on his teenage daughter. I didn't press the matter any further. In the afternoon, Anna took her weekender luggage and headed off to the airport in Newark. Marco was really glad to see me. It had been over a year since the two of us had gotten together. It seems I was one of the few guys from the junior mafia who had been successful in getting out of the old neighborhood before spending any more time in jail. Marco would also remind me of the outstanding debt he owed me. Anything you need, MC, you just give Marco a call, and he'll take care of it for you. Saturday night was spent at the Silver Leopard Lounge on the east side of town. The strip club could easily pass for the Bada Bing Club on The Sopranos. There were a dozen or more young, scantily clad females dancing on stage and lap dancing in the audience. A sweet young thing she couldn't have been much more than a day older than her 18th birthday came over and began to wiggle her smooth ass at my face. Go ahead, MC. She's yours for the night if you want her, Marco said, squeezing her left hip. Sorry, Marco, but you know me always faithful to my wedding vows. I can't say I'm not seriously tempted, but I do believe in loyalty and fidelity. I looked at the lovely young stripper and just shook my head. No. She pouted for a second and then moved on to try her luck with another male customer. Damn, you're really serious about this fidelity thing, aren't you, MC? Marco said with some disbelief in his voice. You got that right. Without fidelity, there's nothing. No love, no marriage. The next morning was a typical cold, windy Rochester day, but that didn't matter to the horde of fans who trekked off to the Buffalo Bills Stadium to see the game between the Giants and the Ravens. There is a bitter rivalry between these two football teams that borders on gang warfare ever since the Giants snatched victory from the jaws of defeat in one of the NFL's most memorable moments with a fortunate bounce. A wide receiver found himself on the end of an unlikely reception that changed the outcome of a fantastic defensive struggle. Neither team has forgotten that legacy it's a good thing guns are not permitted on the playing field. The Giants weren't having a great year at this point in the season. They were 5 wins and 5 losses. Today would be the biggest game of the season. It was hard-hitting all afternoon on the football field. I was getting hoarse from all the shouting and screaming I would been doing, but the final score was Giants 21, Ravens 20. The day couldn't have ended on a better note, or so I thought. As much as Marco wanted me to stick around and get drunk with the rest of the guys, I had to bow out and tell him another time. Tomorrow would be a hard day at the office, and I knew I didn't need a hangover on top of all the other job pressures. Besides, Anna was coming home this evening, and I wanted to be there when she got home. Anna did not come home Sunday night. I left for work Monday morning with some serious doubts in my mind about the latest developments in my marriage. There had been a sense of impending doom whenever I thought deeply about the state of the relationship between Anna and myself. Sure, there were rough patches in all marriages, but maybe our marriage had decayed into something more than just a rough patch. The workday was as hectic as I thought it would be when I left home in the morning. Several high-level meetings and a harassment lawsuit brought against the company were high on my agenda. It wasn't until 5:30 when I had a chance to sit down and check my emails. There were a dozen emails from the staff along with the latest information on the lawsuit. Near the end of the list of emails was one that seemed to jump off the screen. It was titled, "Who was the last one to know?" As I opened the email, expecting some humorous animated cartoon. I was suddenly faced with a photo of Anna and another man engaged in a passionate embrace and a lip-locked kiss. At the bottom of the photo was a text message that simply said, "Want to know what happened after this? Click on the next link." A cold chill raised up my spine as I hesitated for a moment, staring at the photo of Anna kissing another man. Then I clicked on the next link. The screen flashed up another photo this time. Anna and the man she was kissing were both nude and standing together in a motel room. Again, at the bottom of the photo was a text message that simply said, "Want to know what happened after this? Click on the next link." My hand was trembling. There was a tightness in my throat and chest as the nude image of my wife burned itself into my brain. There was a part of me that did not want to see the next photo. Still, I knew I had to click on the link. The next photo was the end of my marriage. Anna was on the bed, on all fours, with the same man from the other two photos. There was an expression of lust and ecstasy on Anna's face. The only woman I had ever completely loved was nothing but a cheating adulteress. I loved and trusted her with my whole heart, and now she was ripping that heart out of my chest. The text at the bottom of the photo simply said, "Provided by Anthony Harrison." My worst nightmare had just been shoved in my face. There was no doubt that Anna's coldness toward me over these past couple of months was more than just a wife being irate at her husband. Her coldness was akin to the rigor mortis setting into our dying marriage. What follows anger and rage? For me, it was a calm resolve which I had not felt in a very long time. It was the resolve of revenge now settling into my mind. Infidelity and betrayal would not stand in my lifetime. There were two people who would pay dearly for the insult they knowingly heaped upon me. My first thoughts were about the person who sent the incriminating emails to me. There was no name or other indication where the emails were sent from. Questions kept banging around in my head. Why would someone send this email to me? What would they hope to gain from exposing my wife's infidelity? Were they friends of mine or enemies of Anna? I would have to work out that problem later. I slipped a CD disc into my computer and made a copy of the email along with the 3 photos. Then I deleted the email and followed that with a scrubber program which erases all evidence of the email from my hard drive. As I sat back in my swivel chair trying to make sense of Anna's betrayal of our marriage, the only explanation I could come up with was to blame it on Anna's multiple personalities. Yet, if she wanted a divorce, I would have given it to her, and we both could have walked away from this train wreck of a marriage. But now, my revenge would be swift and complete. I would take no prisoners nor give any mercy to either of them. The plan was beginning to gel inside my mind. I left the office building and went around the corner to a pay phone. The number I dialed was an untraceable pay-as-you-go cell phone. "Marco, I think it's time for me to collect on that debt you owe me." When I got home around 7:30, Anna was already home and watching TV. She didn't get up and run over to hug and kiss me. She just looked up and simply said, "You're coming home late." "So were you," was my simple reply as I moved into the kitchen area. Nothing else was said between the two of us. I took a beer out of the refrigerator and walked down the hall to the spare room I had converted into an office. I locked the door behind me. When a person is convicted of a capital crime in this country, there is usually one of 2 sentences. The guilty person could receive the death penalty or life in prison. In my revenge plan, there would be 1 death penalty and 1 life in prison sentence. I needed some quiet time to think through the rest of my revenge plan. Marco would do his part in settling the score with Mr. Anthony Harrison. For me, settling the score with Anna would be a personal effort. I had to put everything in place to make the revenge seem to the police like a simple matter of a wife running away from her loving husband. Over the next couple of days, I continued to send flowers to Anna's office for everyone to see that her loving husband still cared about her. I made reservations for dinner at a restaurant near her office. I left messages for her to meet me there for dinner, but she never showed up. I told the maitre d' to give our table to someone else, making sure he'd remember me being stood up by my wife. Anna came home later that evening with no explanation or reason for not showing up for our dinner reservation. The fact was, I simply didn't care for anything she might have said in her defiance. The die had been cast. The wheels of revenge were in motion. Later the next day, a courier came to my office and handed me an envelope marked personal and confidential. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The heading was in bold print, "Destroy after reading." The first sentence simply said, Get an airtight alibi for tomorrow night. The second sentence had a name, Carlos Medeiros, and a phone number. I read and reread the phone number until I had it memorized. Then, I fed the sheet of paper through the shredder, gathering up the shredded pieces to discard in various trash cans outside the office building. I beat Anna home from work that evening, changed clothes, poured a tall glass of bourbon, and sat down to listen to some smooth jazz. The TV would not go on tonight. It was to be my night as king of my castle, and Anna would have to find some way to entertain herself. There was no confrontation when she got home. She quickly sized up the scene and turned around, walking out the door again. I didn't care where she was going, maybe out to eat, maybe out to meet Anthony Harrison again. I could care less. The sand in the hourglass was almost empty for the two of them. I was in bed when Anna finally came home and slipped quietly into bed alongside me. Silence was the loudest noise to be heard before I fell asleep. Thursday evenings are the usual poker night for several of the guys from work. I had joined in the game a couple of times just to keep in touch with the office gossip. It's amazing what bits of information you can pick up when guys loosen up with a few drinks in them. The game was held in the back room of the Rusty Horseshoe Bar. This was going to be my airtight alibi for the rest of the evening. This time, it was me who slipped into bed early in the morning. The clock on my nightstand read 2:30 as I pulled the covers over me. Not a sound or movement from Anna. It wasn't hard for me to fall asleep, even though I knew what had taken place sometime earlier that evening. Now that Anthony Harrison had been delivered his death penalty, it was time to mete out the punishment for the second perpetrator. There didn't need to be any immediate action for the life in prison penalty. The fact that Anna's punishment would begin soon after I made a phone call gave me a sense of satisfaction and justice. Whatever was in Anna's twisted personality that made her think she could blatantly disrespect me in the most hideous manner was something for someone else to determine. I no longer felt any compassion toward the woman I once loved with all my heart and soul. The retribution about to fall on her was of her own making. The police interviewed every member of the staff at Navarra Realty Group. They received several interesting but inconsistent statements from members of the staff. Anna was one of the people they interviewed more than once. Detective Lawrence Baxter stopped by the house that evening and questioned me about any knowledge I might have about Anthony Harrison. I told the detective I had met Anthony only once at a Christmas party Navarra held for all its employees and their spouses. Other than that one time, I hadn't seen or spoken to Mr. Harrison. The detective tried to bait me with several questions, inferring that Anthony and Anna may have been more than just co-workers at the agency. I told him I had complete faith in my wife's faithfulness, and I couldn't think of any reason to doubt her fidelity. He just smiled at me as if he were thinking I was the poor, sorry husband. The funeral for Anthony Harrison was held on Tuesday. That morning, I saw Anna dressed in her solemn black dress, the same one she wore for my mother's funeral. She didn't ask if I wanted to come with her to Anthony's funeral. Whatever she was thinking concerning Anthony's death, she kept to herself. I'm sure she had a lot to think about, including the murder and her infidelity. On several occasions during the following week, Anna seemed to want to start a serious discussion about our relationship. My cold shoulder quickly halted any of her attempts. I was beyond any form of reconciliation or kiss and make up. I had my finger on the button and could push it any time I chose to end the charade. 3 weeks after Anthony's murder, the police investigation seemed to peter out. They could find no new leads. Someone hinted that Anthony might have been murdered by a loan shark or a bookie. During those 3 weeks, Anna's mental state continued to deteriorate. She seemed more absent-minded and confused. Little things frightened her. I offered no aid or comfort to her, even though I could see she was having a difficult time. Too bad, I thought to myself, as I watched her slowly falling apart. Finally, on the following Thursday, I made the phone call to Carlos. He already had the plan in place and was anxious to get it underway. Anna had only hours before her new life would begin. Friday morning, I was off to work before Anna was dressed. I didn't want to see her this last time in my house. The sand in the hourglass was empty. A car with 2 men in it was parked across the street from our house. The kidnapping occurred at an intersection where there was a 4-way stop sign. A car in front and one behind blocked any attempt for her to drive away. With the precision of a Delta Force team, 2 men moved into action as soon as the driver's door was opened. A needle was stuck into her arm as the seatbelt was cut away from her body. Anna was pushed into the passenger seat as one of the men got in behind the steering wheel. The three vehicles drove off quickly. The total elapsed time was less than 30 seconds. There were no witnesses. At 11 that morning, in a branch bank located on the north side of town, a woman dressed and made to look exactly like Anna walked into the bank and handed the teller a withdrawal slip for $30,000 from our joint account. The woman had a driver's license and passport as proof of identity. It took several minutes for the teller to get the withdrawal in the form of a cashier's check. A guard escorted the woman out to her car, noting the license plate as she drove out of the parking lot. The line of passengers at the Delta Airlines ticket counter was not very long as the Anna lookalike made her way to the smiling clerk behind the counter. She picked up the boarding pass after showing the clerk her photo ID and passport. The flight reservations had been made online the night before. The first leg of the trip was to JFK Airport and then a nonstop on flight number 873 to Buenos Aires. Her flight left Rochester at 5 in the afternoon for JFK, New York. Then at 10:30 that evening, the Delta Airlines plane lifted off the runway, taking the passenger Anna Carlucci on an overnight flight to Argentina. I waited until noon on Saturday before calling the police to report a missing person. Surprisingly, Detective Lawrence Baxter was the officer who came to the house to take the report. I told him Anna had not come home at her usual time, and when I tried calling her cell phone, I received the not in service notification. I also called Megan Kruger, one of Anna's close friends at Navarra Realty Group. Megan told me Anna hadn't come to work on Friday and hadn't even called in to report off. Detective Baxter was making some cryptic notes in his notepad. Every now and then, he'd look up at me. He finally began to ask questions about our marriage, whether we were having problems, and if those problems had anything to do with Anna's disappearance. I told him the same thing I would said when he questioned me after Anthony Harrison's murder. Our marriage was fine, and I couldn't think of any reason why Anna would voluntarily disappear. He then asked me if I had anything to do with foul play involving Anna. Again, I told him I loved my wife and could not harm her. Lying to the police was an actor's trait I would develop at a very early age. Running with the junior mafiate still worked well for me. 3 days later, Detective Baxter came to my office during business hours. I guessed he wanted to personally gauge the husband he was dealing with. After being ushered into my office, he sat down and gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Do you have any news concerning Anna's whereabouts?" I wore my distressed husband expression as I questioned him. "Yes and no, Mr. Carlucci. We did some retracing of Anna's activities after she left your house on Friday morning. Several people claim they saw her having coffee at the Sunrise Cafe on Central Avenue around 10 on Friday morning. She then showed up at Monroe National Bank around 11. We have a video surveillance tape of her at a cashier's window making a $30,000 withdrawal from your joint savings account." Detective Baxter stopped, assessing the shocked expression on my face. My acting must have passed the test as I asked in amazed shock, "Anna took $30,000 out of our savings account? That's not possible. She didn't tell me anything about wanting to withdraw that kind of money." The facts are pretty clear. The cashier made photocopies of Anna's driver's license and her passport before making out the cashier's check. I'm sure that once you see the surveillance tape, you'll be able to identify the person at the cashier's window as your wife, Anna. Detective Baxter stopped again to gauge my reactions. "I still think there must be some mistake, Detective. Anna and I talked about everything in our marriage. I'm sure she would have told me if she needed a large sum of money." My bewildered look backed up my words as I stared back at him. "The most disturbing news, Mr. Carlucci, is the fact that your wife purchased airline tickets to New York and on to Buenos Aires. We located her car in the long-term parking lot at the airport. Her flight left Rochester Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., and then her flight to Buenos Aires left New York at 10:30 p.m. We contacted the Argentine police in hopes of locating Anna, but she seems to have vanished once she arrived in Buenos Aires." Detective Baxter was now staring hard at me, waiting for my reaction. No, this is craziness," I shouted. "Anna would never do anything like that. I know she loves me, and I love her. Leaving the country is nonsense." I was telling myself to lay it on thick as I acted out the betrayed husband script for the detective. I even began to cry right in front of him. There was silence in my office for a minute or so before the detective started talking again. "Do you think this has anything to do with the murder of Anthony Harrison?" "What? How do you even dare ask that question?" My wife had nothing to do with that murder. You interviewed her yourself. She was never charged with anything connected with that case. We never charged your wife, Mr. Carlucci, but she was high on our suspect list. Several people we interviewed told us they suspected your wife and Mr. Harrison were lovers. His eyes seemed to bore holes into my head. You've got to be kidding. First, you tell me my wife left the country, and now you're accusing her of being involved with Harrison's murder? You better have more proof than some office gossip to back that up. My eyes were drilling back into his. We're still working that case, Mr. Carlucci. Now that your wife has fled the country, our suspicions about her involvement in the murder have increased. He paused with a pursed lip, continuing, there was evidence at the crime scene that indicated the murder was more than just a mob hit for money. The attack on Harrison's body indicated a personal angle to the murder. Harrison was tortured and beaten for several hours before he was strangled. I made a small laughing sound as I responded, and you think my petite wife did all that? She can hardly open a pickle jar, let alone strangle anyone. Your accusations seem to get more ridiculous every time you open your mouth. I wanted to sound like I was getting angry at Detective Baxter. Maybe so, Mr. Carlucci, but all the evidence so far points to your wife's involvement. She may have had someone else helping her. He paused again, his eyes narrowing slightly. And you think I was that other person? I shot back before he could say another word. We did consider that possibility, but you had a solid alibi for the time of the murder, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Let me get this straight. You come here today, tell me you haven't found my wife, but believe she left the country because she was involved in a murder. You also implied that I was a likely suspect in helping her with that murder. I paused and glared directly at him. Now, did I get all of that correct, Detective? He just sat there, staring back, trying to gauge whether my indignation was an act or genuine. Is there anything else, Detective? I asked, a hint of scorn in my voice. If not, this meeting is over. I stood up from behind my desk and moved toward the door, opening it to indicate it was time for him to leave. Detective Baxter got up from his chair and moved slowly to the door. Thank you for your time, Mr. Carlucci. They'll keep you informed about your wife's disappearance. He didn't extend his hand, and I didn't offer mine. I closed the door after he left and settled back in my swivel chair. I was certain Detective Baxter's visit was intended to extract more information than it was to provide me with any substantial updates about the two cases he was handling. I slowly mulled over every statement he made and every question he asked. It was clear he suspected I might be involved in one or both of the cases. Yet my alibis were solid. I was playing poker on the Thursday night Anthony Harrison was murdered, and I was in meetings all day last Friday when Anna went missing. It was Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Anna's disappearance, and I still hadn't heard from either Carlos or Marco. I had no idea where Anna was or what was happening to her. Over these past 2 weeks, there were several times when I got the distinct feeling I was being followed on my way to work in the morning or when I returned home at night. My movements were very carefully planned to work, back home, and some grocery shopping on the way, nothing that could look like evasive action or the behavior of someone hiding something. Every other day, I called Detective Baxter to inquire about my missing wife. He had nothing new to report. The Argentine police had found no trace of Anna after her arrival in Buenos Aires. That afternoon, I called Domino's for a pizza and sat watching college football on TV. When the doorbell rang, the pizza delivery guy was standing there with my hot pizza. I paid him and gave him a couple of bucks for a tip. As I opened the pizza box in the kitchen, I noticed an envelope sitting on top of the pizza. I opened the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper. Tomorrow morning, dress for church. Go to the Tin Mass at St. Mary's. During communion, slip out the side door on the east side of the church. There will be a dark Ford Crown Victoria waiting outside. Get in. I held the sheet of paper in my hand, knowing this was to be the last meeting with Anna before Carlos arranged her final destination. He had waited 2 weeks to ensure the cover story of Anna flying out of the country was well documented, and that it was all the evidence the police had to work on. It was an elaborate deception set up by Carlos to send the investigation in the wrong direction, and it established that Anna was alive when she boarded the plane to Buenos Aires. This way, the police couldn't try to build a circumstantial case of me doing away with Anna, even though there was no body to be found. The bedroom was pitch black as I lay staring up at the ceiling. This past month and a half had been a living nightmare. After receiving that email, the chain of events reminded me that my ancestral roots would always bring out the dark side of my personality whenever I was disrespected. Whether it was nature or nurture, there was no doubt in my mind where my dark side came from. St. Mary's is a large church, and the 10 Mass is highly attended by hundreds of parishioners. It was easy to get lost in the crowd and check for anyone following me. If the police had a tail on me, they must have waited outside the church. As the throng of people moved to the front of the church for communion, I quickly slipped out the side door. The dark Ford sedan was waiting with its motor running. I got into the back seat as the car pulled into traffic. The trip took about 10 minutes before the big sedan pulled up in front of a large, deserted warehouse. The driver never turned around, but just told me to enter the building through the side door. The inside of the warehouse was vast and empty, with light coming from a few office windows near the back. As I approached, Carlos stepped out and walked toward me. This was our first face-to-face meeting. "Hello, MC," he said with a slight smile. "Marco told me it would be all right to call you MC." His hand was extended, and we shook. "Are you sure you want to see your wife again? These last several weeks haven't been very nice for her," he said, his words a subtle warning that I might not like what I was about to see. "I'm past caring what she looks like or what she's gone through since you took her," I replied, moving toward the open door. "Is she on drugs now?" I asked, pausing at the entrance. "No, but I'm sure she wishes she were. I've kept her clean and very conscious the entire time. She's now a broken woman and well-trained for her new life." We both stepped into the brightly lit room. In the middle of the room sat Anna, tied to a chair. I walked around her and stood directly in front of her, inches from her body. She looked straight ahead, her gaze fixed over my shoulder, her eyes empty and without their former sparkle. "For the rest of your life, Anna, you will remember that you brought all this misery down upon yourself." I began slowly, enunciating each word. "I put up with your mood swings and coldness, but I could not tolerate your infidelity. For the disrespect you and your lover heaped upon me, you will now spend the rest of your life paying for your adultery. Anthony has already paid his debt to me." Anna's face remained stoic, her gaze unwavering. Only a single tear slipped down her cheek. It was the only acknowledgement I received. I took a final look, wanting her to know it was me who had brought both her and her lover to justice. Carlos had assured me that, wherever she was sent, they would take good care of Eros, good care, as they provided for their most valued cattle. I turned and walked out of the room without looking back. The Ford sedan returned me to St. Mary's just as the 11 Mass was ending. I left the church and drove straight home. There was a tight knot in my gut that needed to be drowned in a tall glass of bourbon. It's been 3 years since the last time I saw Anna. I have almost forgotten her completely. There are no traces of her in my life anymore. I even sold the house we were living in at the time of her disappearance. Both of Detective Baxter's cases have been moved to the cold case files. I spend more time now with Marco at the Silver Leopard Lounge. I've sampled the offerings of that sweet young stripper on more than one occasion. Marriage is out of the question for me. My 5 years with Anna convinced me that women are more trouble than they are worth once you marry them. My parents were right about regretting my involvement with Anna. Someone once told me that children should listen to their parents' advice. Children rarely do. I later found out that it was Megan Kruger who sent me the email. She had been Anthony Harrison's lover before he dumped her for Anna. I never thanked her for the email, nor did I ever find out how she obtained those photos of Anthony and Anna. I guess she got her revenge at the same time I did. There's something to be said about the wrath of a woman scorned. Thanks for watching. How far would you go if trust was broken? Comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
When the doorbell rang, Wed just finished dinner. Jenny, my 13-year-old daughter, jumped up to answer it before either I or her brother could. She quickly returned with a puzzled look on her face. "Dad, it's a policeman. He wants to talk to you," she said. A jolt of fear shot through me, but I tried to hide it. I went to the door and saw that it was actually a New York State trooper. "Are you Mike Donovan?" the trooper asked. Yes, I confirmed. "Are you the husband of Emily Donovan?" When I nodded, the trooper looked at my 2 kids and said, "May I speak with you in private, Mr. Donovan?" My throat constricted, and I had to clear it before I could speak. "Tommy, Jenny, please go to your rooms. I need to speak with the officer alone." They began to protest, but when I barked, "Now!" they jumped and hurried to their rooms. They weren't used to hearing that tone from me. Once they were gone, the officer turned back to me. "Mr. Donovan, I've been asked to give you some bad news. Your wife's airplane is missing and presumed down. It dropped off the radar tonight approximately halfway between Boston Logan Airport and Bermuda. A Coast Guard ship is in the area now looking for survivors." The facts were straightforward enough. In her role as a regional sales VP for a major multinational corporation, Emily had set out to visit their Caribbean headquarters in Bermuda, accompanied by the region's chief financial officer. She was an experienced small plane pilot, so the flight to Bermuda should have been routine. I hadn't thought much of it when Emily called to let me know her plans. Now I was distraught. This had to be my worst nightmare. My wife's plane had crashed at night in the shark-infested waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The officer provided a few additional details that did nothing to give me any encouragement before he left, promising that the Coast Guard would call with updates in the morning or earlier if there was any news. No sooner had the door closed behind the trooper than both Tommy and Jenny came running to my side, anxiety written on their faces, asking questions I couldn't answer. I knew they had been listening. I would have eavesdropped too if I'd been in their shoes. The three of us clung to each other, each trying to find encouraging things to say to the others. Jenny began to cry, and although he was trying to be brave, Tommy's eyes were red as well. I did my best to keep it together for their sake, but inside I was frantic. There was no thought of cleaning the dishes or doing homework. Our anguish kept us within arm's length of each other for the rest of the evening. It grew past their normal bedtime, but still no phone call came. Finally, exhausted by the lateness of the hour and our fears, all three of us gravitated to the master bedroom, and the kids slept with me for the first time since they were little and afraid of thunderstorms. We were up and trying to eat breakfast the next morning when a representative from the Coast Guard called. The slim hope stirred by the call was quickly dashed when the officer told me that the cutter searching the area had found nothing. I called the principal at the middle school the kids attended to let her know why Tommy and Jenny would be absent that day. Then I went to check on them, only to find them in front of the television, watching a report on the missing plane on CNN. I wasn't sure whether to let them keep watching or turn the set off, but before I could reach a decision, the phone began to ring again. From that point on, whenever I hung up from one call, another would come in. The first calls were from Emily's parents and my own, all frantic with worry while trying to project a false optimism that she would miraculously be found. I promised to call back immediately with any news. Next came the calls from our friends and Emily's colleagues. All wanted to say or do something to help, but none of them had any idea how. The conversations were short and awkward. Most difficult of all were the calls from the media. I should have expected those, but I was caught off guard when the first reporter called, and I talked to the reporter from the Times much longer than I wanted. Then representatives from other media began calling, and when I realized what was happening, I began screening all the calls, returning only those from people I cared about. During all this, neighbors and friends started coming by with condolences and food. At first their generosity was appreciated because I had no energy for preparing meals. But soon we had more food than we could hope to eat in a week. It was an old tradition to express concern and condolences with food. But while I appreciated the gesture, every roast and casserole was a bitter reminder that my wife of 18 years was almost certainly dead. The next few days were horrible. We were virtual prisoners in our own home, kept there by our desire not to deal with other people and by our hope for some news from the Coast Guard. I made daily calls to the office in Boston for updates, but the reports were always negative. Then, 5 days after the trooper had arrived at our doorstep, came the news we'd been dreading. A Coast Guard officer called to tell me that wreckage from Emily's plane had been found. There were no signs of any survivors. "I'm sorry, sir," the officer concluded, "but we're going to have to suspend search and rescue operations at this time. I wanted nothing more than to hide away and mourn in solitude, but that option wasn't available. Instead, I faced a seemingly endless list of painful responsibilities. The worst, of course, was having to tell Tommy and Jenny the sad news and trying to console them. When they finally calmed down, I had to phone relatives and close friends to let them know. Next was a call to our church to arrange a memorial service, followed by one to the newspaper to submit an obituary. Then came more calls to share the time and date of the service. By the time I was done, I felt physically and emotionally exhausted. Somehow we made it through the service and began the slow, painful process of trying to resume a normal life. The following week, the kids returned to school, and the resumption of their routine seemed to help a little. I was not so fortunate. A whole new set of duties fell on my shoulders. At the urging of a friend, I contacted an attorney to find out what my legal responsibilities were. I was shocked to learn that I would have to petition for a death certificate. "But her plane crashed at sea," I protested. "How can there be any doubt?" "I know," the attorney commiserated, "but in the absence of a body and a physician's certificate, the court must make a formal declaration." "Am I going to have to wait 7 years?" I asked in distress. "No," the attorney assured me. "In a case like this, where an individual has been lost at sea, there's usually no significant delay. You may have to answer some questions, but typically such cases are resolved very quickly." "I can get the petition started for you," he went on. "I can also help you get all your other documents changed." When I looked confused, the attorney explained, like any joint bank accounts, your mortgage, your insurance, car titles, your will, anything like that. "While I do that, you need to contact your wife's company to see about any benefits you may be entitled to, as well as to claim any personal belongings." I shook my head in weariness. In my grief, I hadn't stopped to think just how complicated it would be to untangle the life Emily and I had shared. Now I faced another chore that I dreaded, calling on the widow of Jim Martin, the financial executive who had been on the plane with Emily. I'd met Sarah only a couple of times at company functions, but I'd taken an immediate dislike to her husband. In my eyes, he was one of those egotistical types who thought he was smarter than everyone else. In the brief time I spent with him, he managed to drop enough names and boast about his accomplishments enough to leave a bad taste in my mouth. But that wasn't his widow's fault, I reminded myself, and I felt I had a duty to call on her. I phoned ahead, so Sarah was expecting me. As we exchanged condolences, I realized she was probably the only one who truly knew how I was feeling. When we were seated in her living room, she asked kindly, "So, how are you doing now, Mike?" "It's hard, Sarah. It's really hard. I just can't accept that she's really gone. So many things keep reminding me of her." I shook my head helplessly. "You know what's the hardest thing? When I'm out on the street or in a crowd, I keep thinking that I've spotted her. The other day I must have scared some poor woman half to death when I chased her down because I thought she was Emily." I looked at the floor, recalling the memory and my emotions when I realized what I was doing. Sarah watched me with sympathetic eyes. She knew there weren't any words to help. Finally, I looked up at her and asked, "How about you, Sarah? How are you doing?" "It's not easy, Mike, but I'm going to make it," she told me. "The truth is, I'm probably doing much better than you. Jim and I didn't have any children, so I don't have two to console the way you do. Also," she hesitated, "and I wouldn't tell this to anyone else, Jim and I weren't getting along very well before all this happened. I'd caught him having a couple of flings in the past, and I think he was in the middle of another affair. If this hadn't happened, we'd probably be headed for divorce before too long." "I'm so sorry to hear that, Sarah," I told her sympathetically. "I can only imagine the conflicting emotions you must be feeling." "Yes," she agreed. "One moment I'm relieved that I don't have to deal with his cheating anymore, and the next I'm filled with guilt because I don't feel sadder. And despite everything, there's a part of me that still misses him." "Are you going to be okay financially?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "The good news is that the company provided life insurance on Jim, and because he died while on business, with the double indemnity clause, I'll receive twice the face value. The bad news is I'm going to need every penny of that money because I've learned Jim made a series of bad investments in the futures market, and severely depleted our net worth. What Sarah said about her late husband did not surprise me. It took no stretch of the imagination to believe that an egotist like Jim Martin would not prove a faithful husband. For that matter, the idea that Martin would fancy himself a wheeler dealer in the market was entirely in keeping with my mental picture of the man. What grabbed my attention was Sarah's mention of the company-paid life insurance. I remembered my attorney's advice and made a mental note to contact the benefits department of Emily's company right away. If Martin had been covered, surely Emily would have had a similar policy, and until I could find a job, those funds might come in very handy. After chatting a few minutes longer, I arose from the couch. "Sarah, please forgive me, but I'm going to have to cut my visit short. Tommy and Jenny will be getting out of school soon, and I've got to go pick them up. But please stay in touch, and if there's anything I can do to help, even if you just need a sympathetic ear to bend, please don't hesitate to call me." When I drove up to our home after picking up Tommy and Jenny, I was surprised to see a car parked out front. I got my children into the house through the garage, and a minute later, the doorbell rang. Outside were a man who looked to be in his 50s and a younger woman, both dressed in business attire. "I'm Special Agent Harold Burns," the man introduced himself, "and this is Special Agent Olivia Murray. We're with the New York Bureau of Investigation. We'd like to come in and ask you a few questions in conjunction with your wife's disappearance." When she realized they were law enforcement officers, Jenny wrapped her arms around my waist and buried her face in my side. I could feel her tears dampening my shirt, and I held her tightly. "What's this about?" I demanded angrily. Before the first agent could speak, Agent Murray interceded. "I'm so sorry we've upset your daughter, Mr. Donovan. All we're trying to do is complete a routine check in connection with your petition for a death certificate for Mrs. Donovan. If you'd like us to come back later, we'll try to do so at a time that would be better for you." I ignored her and turned to face my daughter. "It's all right, honey. Nothing bad has happened." The female agent bent down on one knee, reached into her purse, pulled out a tissue, and handed it to Jenny. "Here, honey," she said in a gentle voice. Jenny hesitated, then shyly accepted the tissue, wiping her eyes and blowing her nose. When I saw that my daughter had calmed down, I put my arm around her and spoke to her. "These people need to talk with me a while about your mom, Jenny. Why don't you go get started on your homework? I'll be right out here in the living room if you need me." With that, I gently pushed my daughter toward her room. Then I turned to face the officers. "If it won't take too long, let's go ahead and get this over with." The three of us stepped into the living room and seated ourselves around a coffee table. "We just need to get a little background information on your wife, Mr. Donovan," the male agent began. "How long were the two of you married?" "We got married in 1991, right after we both graduated from Syracuse University," I replied, thinking back to the beautiful brunette co-ed I had wooed and won so many years ago. "And she was employed by International Marketing Corporation up until, well, until her disappearance?" "That's right," I confirmed. "She was sales vice president for the northeastern U.S. If her region was the Northeast, why would she have been traveling to Bermuda?" the younger woman asked. "At IMC," I explained, "the Northeast included Bermuda as well as the U.S. Their Caribbean headquarters are in Bermuda, so it wasn't uncommon for Emily to fly down there." "Emily?" the woman asked. I felt my voice grow husky. "Emily was my pet name for her." Agent Murray reached across and patted my hand sympathetically. "That's all right, Mr. Donovan. I know this is hard for you." The older agent decided to change the line of questioning. "Was it normal for your wife to fly her own plane on business trips?" "Yes," I replied. "Emily's dad was a pilot, and she got her license as soon as she was old enough. She took every opportunity to fly herself because she said it made her independent of commercial airline schedules. She used to say she could get where she needed to be, complete her business, and be back home while the competition was still stuck in the terminal. She felt like it gave her an edge, especially when she was starting out." The two agents made notes. Then Agent Murray looked up at me. "And what about you, Mr. Donovan? What do you do?" I managed to smile. "I'm a house husband." Seeing their looks, I went on, I was an aerospace engineer up until 3 years ago when my company cut back and I was laid off. The only prospects I could find for a new job would have required me to relocate out of state. But in the meantime, Emily's job was going great. She'd gotten a couple of major promotions and was earning a great salary plus big bonuses. It didn't make sense for her to quit, so we agreed that I'd manage the household and take care of the kids while she worked. And how did this change affect your relationship with Mrs. Donovan? Agent Burns asked. Why is that relevant? I asked irritably. Please bear with us, Mr. Donovan, the younger woman interceded. We are required to check to see if there could be any factors that might have played a role in your wife's disappearance. It's all routine. Somewhat mollified, I looked at the two of them. Of course, it was a big change for me, but I'm an engineer. I'm trained to measure and assess all the factors in a design. It was easy to see that my changing roles was the right thing for our family at that time. It made it possible for Emily to devote herself to her career, and I made sure that Tommy and Jenny always had a parent there for them at all times. Neither of the agents said anything, and I felt as though the question was still hanging in the air. I don't mean it was easy, I went on. She was always calling on customers or attending meetings at corporate, so I didn't see as much of her as I would have liked. Sometimes it felt like her job came first. I suddenly realized what I was saying and added swiftly, but that's pretty much par for the course in corporate life. Besides, it worked out well. I caught myself. Until now. Just 2 more questions, Mr. Donovan, Agent Burns said, writing on his pad. Did you notice any changes in your wife's behavior in the time prior to her disappearance? Not really, I replied after a moment's thought. I know she was under a lot of pressure in the last year or so, and her travel schedule was heavier than ever. But Emily said she was in line for a major promotion. When she got it, she promised the new job would cut down on her travel as well as come with a high-level title and a big bump in her salary. Last question, Agent Burns said, writing on his pad. Are you aware of any changes in your finances that your wife might have made in the last few months? No, I replied with certainty. I keep up with all our finances, and I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary. The young woman glanced at her partner. I think we've taken enough of your time, Mr. Donovan. We should be able to wrap all this up pretty quickly, and we'll let you know as soon as we've concluded. In the meantime, if you think of anything you feel we should know, please call me at this number. As she spoke, she handed me her card, and the 2 agents headed for the door. I headed back to my kids' rooms to make sure they were getting their homework done. Both looked busy when I peeked in. They're strong kids, I thought. They've been through hell, and they're holding up well, all things considered. The next day, I drove to IMC headquarters to pay a visit to the benefits department. The head of the department met me and, after expressing her condolences, handed over a box filled with Emily's personal effects from her office. I had to swallow hard when I saw the framed family portrait she had kept on her desk. The director then turned me over to a specialist to advise me on Emily's benefits. The first order of business was to look at Emily's 401k account. I had regularly seen her annual statements, so I wasn't expecting any surprises. When I saw the final total, however, it was quite a bit higher than I had expected. Apparently, during the last year, Emily had upped her contributions to the plan, putting in more than the company would match. She was really trying to provide for her family, the specialist commented with admiration. The specialist went on to advise me to withdraw the funds as soon as possible and roll them over into my own IRA so that I could more easily manage the funds. The other surprise I got was the sheet I received outlining the life insurance benefit I would receive as Emily's beneficiary. I learned that Emily had opted for the maximum amount of insurance for which she was eligible. With the accidental death multiplier, I was amazed to realize that I would receive almost 4 years' worth of Emily's income. The insurance company will pay that out in annual installments, the woman explained. Otherwise, the taxes would eat you alive. Payment of all of the benefits, of course, was contingent on the company's receiving a copy of Emily's death certificate. But after the visit from the 2 GBI agents, I felt confident that would be forthcoming soon. I left the office building much relieved. I had thought I would have to begin an immediate search for another job. Now I realized I had a significant grace period to get my life together. "Thank you, Emily," I whispered fervently. I was making dinner for the family late one afternoon several days later when the doorbell rang. When I went to answer, I found Special Agent Murray on my doorstep again. After I'd asked her in, she explained the purpose of her visit. "Mr. Donovan, I wanted to let you know in person that our investigation has been completed and that your wife's death certificate has been issued. You should receive a copy from the court by certified mail in the next few days." I heaved a sigh of relief. I had believed there would be no problems, but it was a relief to know this important task had been accomplished. Just then, a panicked scream came from the back of the house, and I was horrified to hear Jenny's voice yelling, "Help me, Daddy, help me!" I turned and sprinted for Jenny's room. Celia Murray was right on my heels, her hand reaching for the service revolver in the shoulder holster under her jacket. When I burst into Jenny's room, I found my daughter staring at a large red bloodstain on her jeans. "I'm bleeding, Daddy," she wailed. I was terrified. "What happened, Jenny? Did you cut yourself?" As I started for her side, a hand caught my elbow and pulled me back with surprising strength. "Let me handle this," Celia said firmly, and pushed me toward the door. But I protested, but the young woman would not be moved. "I'll handle this, Mike. Just go out in the living room and wait." Something about the authority in her voice made me pause, and with the determined young woman blocking my way, I tentatively stepped back into the hallway. Celia calmly closed the door in my face. After 15 anxious minutes, the door opened and Celia came out. Before I could ask a question, she grasped my arm. "Jenny is fine. You need to go to the store right now and buy a package of sanitary napkins. Get the smallest size they have. But Jenny, Tommy?" I began to protest. "I'll take care of Jenny and let Tommy know what's happening. You just need to go to the store and get back here as fast as you can," she said. As I drove to a nearby convenience store, the realization hit me, and I began to berate myself. "She started having her menstrual period, you idiot. You should have realized that immediately." On the return trip, I continued to curse myself for never talking to my daughter about the maturation into womanhood. "Oh, Emily, I need you more than ever," I thought in self-pity. When I got home, Celia met me at the front door and snatched the bag away from me. After looking at the package, she smiled. "You did good, Dad." Then she disappeared back into Jenny's room. After 30 more minutes, Celia reappeared with her arm around Jenny, who hung back somewhat shyly. I fell to my knees and hugged my daughter when she came to me. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I should have talked with you about this a long time ago. I just didn't think about it." "It's okay, Daddy," Jenny spoke up. "I just didn't know what was happening and I was scared." Celia explained it all to me. "I know what to do now." As she spoke, she slipped her hand into Celia's and I realized my daughter had made a new friend. I stood and turned to Celia. "Thank you so much. It's a good thing you were here." I guess I panicked for a moment. "I'm afraid I'm not so good with girls." Celia smiled, but before she could speak, Tommy popped around the corner. "Just because my dumb little sister has her first period, does that mean we're not going to have any dinner tonight?" "I'm starving," Jenny shrieked, but I grabbed her before she could attack her big brother. "Tommy, if you talk like that to your sister again, I guarantee you'll be going to bed hungry," I warned my son. But before my threat could sound too ominous, I went on. "Now go wash your hands and set the table." Then I turned back to Celia. "The least we can do is offer you a meal for all you've done. It isn't exactly gourmet cooking, but there's plenty to eat." The young woman was clearly embarrassed. "Thank you, but I can't intrude." Her protestations were halted, however, when Jenny tugged on her hand. "Please, Celia, please stay and eat with us." Gazing at her new friend, Celia smiled and said, "All right, Jenny, just for you." Looking up at me, she smiled again. "Thank you. I'd love to have dinner with your family." The four of us sat down to eat, and Celia found herself the target of numerous questions from the two kids about her experiences in law enforcement. I ate and listened, both in amusement at my children's curiosity and in admiration at the easy way Celia handled their questions. I suddenly realized that this was the first time the two of them had really seemed to come out of the shell of their sorrow. When dessert was over, I shooed Tommy and Jenny off to do their homework, then offered Celia a cup of coffee. As the two of us sat at the table, I got a chance to ask my own questions. You certainly seem to be comfortable with Tommy and Jenny. Do you work a lot with young people? She smiled. Actually, I come from a big family, 2 brothers and 3 sisters. I was the oldest, so I guess I was second mom to the rest of them. She paused to take a sip of her coffee, then went on. That's why I knew what to do with Jenny this afternoon. I got to walk each of my sisters through the trauma of puberty. She looked at me and smiled again. For what it's worth, my dad was just as helpless as you were today. I grinned sheepishly. Well, all I can say is I'm glad you happened to be here. Even when I finally realized what was going on, I still wouldn't have known how to get Jenny calmed down so quickly. She smiled to acknowledge my thanks. Then her expression grew more serious. How are they coping with the loss of their mother? She asked. I sighed. About as well as can be expected, I think. Jenny has been very clingy. I think she's really missing the female influence. As for Tommy, it's hard to tell. He's been sullen and somewhat withdrawn, but I don't know whether that's the result of Emily's death or just the fact that he's a teenager now. Celia looked at me sympathetically. From what I've seen, I think you're doing a great job with them. It's just going to take time for them and for you. With that, she stood and said, I really enjoyed the meal, Mike, but I've intruded on your family far too long. I need to get going, but if it's all right, I'd like to say goodbye to Tommy and Jenny. When I nodded, she walked down the hall, and I heard her say goodbye to Tommy. Then she spent a few minutes in Jenny's room, and when she returned, Jenny came with her, her arm around Celia's waist. She really has made a new friend, I thought in wonder. A couple of days later, a package arrived in the mail for Jenny. When my excited daughter tore open the wrapping, she found a pink stuffed elephant along with a note from Celia. I was gratified by the thoughtfulness, but amused by the selection. Jenny's too old for stuffed animals, I thought. But I was surprised to see the toy given a prominent place on Jenny's bed. I guess there's still some little girl left in her yet, I conceded. I called Celia's office the next day to thank her. I would never have thought of that, I admitted. But somehow, it was just the right thing for Jenny. Celia was delighted that my daughter was pleased with her gift and made me promise to keep in touch and let her know how Jenny and Tommy were doing. A couple of weeks later, I was paying bills one morning when I got a call from Tommy's homeroom teacher. I'd like to meet with you to talk about your son, the teacher told me. He's having some discipline problems in school. I agreed to meet with her the next day, but I decided not to say anything to Tommy that night. I wanted to wait until I learned what was happening before confronting my son. The meeting was set for the following day after class. While the kids were at PE, Mrs. Walsh, the homeroom teacher, told me that Tommy's behavior in class had grown worse over the last few months. I didn't want to say anything at first because I know he's been through so much, the teacher explained, but it seems to be getting worse. He's become increasingly disengaged from his classes. He's not doing his homework, and his other teachers tell me he's not paying attention in their classes. He's always done so well up to now, but his grades are really going to plummet this semester if he doesn't do something to turn things around. I was troubled. How much do you think being a teenager has to do with this, Mrs. Walsh? There's no question that's a tough age for kids, especially boys, she told me, but we're used to that. I think his mother's death is affecting him more than he may have let on to you. You may want to consider getting counseling for him. I thanked the woman and returned to my car to wait uneasily for my kids to finish their gym classes. I was upset to learn about the problems Tommy was having and was determined to have a long talk with the boy. When I got Tommy and Jenny home, I sent Jenny to her room to get started on her homework, then led Tommy into the master bedroom. The boy's face darkened. He knew he was in trouble. I recounted my visit with Tommy's homeroom teacher and cited some of the examples she had given me. "What's going on, Tommy? Why are you acting this way?" I demanded. "No reason," the boy replied sullenly. "Come on, you're smarter than that," I shot back. "Don't you care about your grades?" "Not really," Tommy mumbled. I was frustrated by my son's unresponsiveness, and in anger I tried to shame him into a reaction. "What would your mother think if she knew you were screwing up?" "Who cares?" Tommy shouted back angrily. "She was such a witch." In shock and anger, I grabbed my son and yelled at him, "Don't you ever speak of your mother that way! How can you say such a thing?" In fear at my rage and pain at my strong grip, the boy blurted out, "I saw her! I saw her screwing that man!" As soon as the words came out of his mouth, he slumped to the bed and began to sob. In astonishment, I sat down beside him, put my arm around him, and held him as though he were a small child. "It's all right," I kept repeating, trying to calm his obvious anguish. When Tommy's crying had subsided, I lifted his head. "It's all right, Tommy. I'm not mad at you. Just tell me what you saw." His son looked at him tearfully. "It was last fall. You let me ride my bike to school one day, but I forgot my math homework. So I sneaked out at lunch to come home and get it. While I was looking for it in my room, I heard Mom come in. I didn't want her to catch me, so I hid. That's when I heard the man's voice." "What man?" I asked a little too quickly. "I don't know," Tommy said. "Some guy I never saw before." "That's okay," I soothed him. "Just tell me what happened next." "They came in here, and then it got quiet, so I thought I could sneak out. But then I heard Mom make a funny sound, and I was scared, and I looked in, and they were on the bed, and they were screwing." The words poured out of his mouth faster and faster, as though he was desperate to spit them out. When he finished, he began to cry again. "Why did she do that, Dad? How could Mom act like such a witch?" As I listened to my son's story, I felt myself go numb, but I had no time to deal with my own emotions. My son needed me. "I understand, Tommy. It's okay. I'm sorry you had to see that, but I'm glad you told me." I took my son gently by the shoulders and turned him around to face me. "Sometimes people we love make mistakes or do something we don't like. That doesn't mean we don't love them anymore. It just means we don't like what they did. I don't know why your mother would do that, son, but I know she loved you and Jenny very much. It's the good things she did that I want you to remember about her." I held my son and continued to talk to him for a while longer. When I felt that the boy had calmed down sufficiently, I gently urged him to start on his homework while I went off to the kitchen to get dinner started. Before Tommy left, I enjoined him to say nothing to Jenny. The boy promised, and I felt fairly comfortable that he would keep the disturbing news from his sister. The rest of the evening passed without further incident, but once the kids were in bed, my emotions began to erupt. My first reaction was to deny what Tommy had told me. My son had to be mistaken or have misinterpreted what he saw, but I couldn't maintain that rationalization very long. My son had been too upset by the experience, and I had to admit a teenager these days would certainly recognize sex when he saw it. With that admission, my thoughts turned bitter. How could Emily have betrayed me? I had thought we had a good marriage. How could she have been screwing someone on the side? For that matter, who was the other man and how long had the affair lasted? It's hard enough to lose your wife in a plane crash, I thought in despair. It's worse to learn you lost her long before that. Sleep was slow in coming that night, and the next day I was in a black mood. It was Tuesday, a day I would normally go to the gym, and after the kids were off to school, I decided to keep the routine. The exercise helped divert my attention, but when I hit the treadmill, my mind returned to Emily's infidelity. How could Emily have done that, and in our own bed? I asked. Somehow the location made the betrayal even worse. For that matter, how could she know I wouldn't be home? The answer hit me immediately. It must have been one of the days when I went to the gym. I'm such a creature of habit. She would have been pretty certain the house would be empty. But the answer to that question immediately raised others. If she planned her little assignation to fit my schedule, that doesn't sound like it was a spur-of-the-moment thing. How often did she meet him there? It couldn't have been every week. Her travel schedule would have interfered. Every question seemed to raise another, each only adding to my anguish. I did my best to act normally around Tommy and Jenny, but over the next few days I continued to suffer. I found myself making a trip to the drugstore to buy antacids. I'd never had stomach problems before. Compounding my misery was the lack of anyone to talk to about my discovery. I certainly didn't want to involve my parents or Emily's. I knew the news would be devastating to them. Likewise, I didn't want to talk to my friends and risk becoming the subject of gossip in the neighborhood. And I thought, I certainly don't want to risk having any of his schoolmates teasing Tommy or Jenny. I felt trapped. I was working at my desk one evening when I noticed Celia Murray's card. She told me to call her if I had any additional information, I remembered. But in truth, I was desperate for any excuse to share my news with someone and get another perspective. I called the cell phone number she had handwritten on the card, and when I identified myself, Celia seemed pleased to hear from me. But her tone changed to one of concern when I told her I needed to talk with her. "Are Jenny and Tommy okay?" she asked anxiously. "They are, but I'm not," I replied. "Could you possibly have lunch with me tomorrow? This isn't the kind of thing I want to discuss over the phone." She quickly agreed and suggested a place near the NYBI offices where she worked. "It's a quiet little place." "We should be able to talk," she assured me. When I hung up, I found myself feeling a bit better at the prospect of unburdening myself. Celia was waiting in the restaurant when I came through the door. She smiled in greeting, but her smile quickly disappeared when she saw the pained expression on my face. After we were seated and had placed our orders, she could stand the suspense no longer. "For heaven's sake, Mike, what's happened?" "You told me to let you know if I had any more information about my wife," I said. "Well, I don't know if this is relevant to your investigation, but I just found out that Emily was cheating on me." As I said that, I was ashamed to feel tears flood my eyes and run down my cheeks. Celia reached across the table and grabbed my hands. "Oh, Mike, that's horrible. Tell me what happened." The whole story of the meeting with Tommy's teacher, the confrontation with my son, and Tommy's anguished revelation came spilling out, interrupted only by the arrival of our food. Celia listened quietly, letting me tell the story at my own pace. Only when he'd reached the end did she speak. "Poor Tommy," she said. "It's no surprise he's been acting out in school. This must have been eating away at him ever since it happened. And then, with her death, it's no wonder he's been so conflicted." She released my hands when the waitress had brought our order, but now she leaned across the table to reach for me again. "I can hardly imagine what this has done to you, Mike," she said quietly, and I could see the sympathy in her eyes. "Was there any indication that something was wrong? Now that you look back, did you see any clue?" "No," I said. "I can't say I saw anything. You know what they say, the husband is always the last to know." I looked down at my untouched plate for a second, then back up at the woman. Ever since she got her big promotion, our sex life had fallen off pretty sharply. But between the pressures of her new role and her travel schedule, I figured it was understandable. I didn't like it, but I felt like I had to accept it for our family's sake. She kept telling me things would get better once she moved up to the national level, but, I paused. I guess that wasn't to be. Then I scowled. What's killing me is I don't have any answers. I don't know who the bastard she was sleeping with was. I don't know when their affair started or how long it had been going on. I don't know if she was in love with the guy or if she was planning to leave me. Worst of all, I don't know why she would do that to me and the kids. Celia squeezed my hands. "Mike, please listen to me. The truth is that you're not likely to ever get the answers to your questions. You're going to have to let all that go. With her death, none of that matters anymore. All you can do is focus on taking care of your family and yourself." "I know you're right," I said, "but it just hurts so bad to be betrayed that way. It makes me wonder when she stopped loving me." "No," Celia said fiercely, "you're wrong. Whatever else may have happened, it's clear that Emily still cared deeply about you and the kids. Look what you found out at IMC. She bought the maximum life insurance to make sure you all were protected. She maxed out her contributions to the 401k plan to put money away for your future. I don't know what else happened in her life, but those sure look like caring acts to me. Thanks, Celia. I'll try to remember that." As we stood to leave, I looked down at the table. Neither of us had touched our food. "I guess I'm not a very good lunch date," I said wryly. "Don't worry about that," she replied lightly. "Missing a meal or two is probably a good thing for me." I looked down at her slim shape. "It sure looks good to me," I thought. Then I was startled to realize I was thinking about her in a sexual way. "It's been a long time," I told myself ruefully. As we walked out the door, she took my arm. "Please stay in touch, Mike, and let me know if there's anything I can do. I'd really like to help." Then she reached up and gave me a kiss on the cheek. As she turned away, I thought I saw a hint of a blush on her cheeks. Driving back home, I was surprised to find that my mood had lightened. "I guess I really needed to get that off my chest," I told myself. The next Saturday, I had been out in the yard picking up limbs that had fallen during a storm. When I got inside, I saw Jenny talking on the telephone. I turned to Tommy, who was standing nearby. "Did someone call?" I asked. "No," Tommy said dismissively. "She's just talking to her new BFF, Celia." I was surprised. "Does she call Celia often? And what's a BFF?" "Oh, Dad," Tommy replied in exasperation, "you're so out of it. BFF is best friend forever." Just then, Jenny looked up and saw me. "Dad, can we ask Celia over for dinner?" "Let me talk to her," I said, extending my hand toward my daughter. When she handed me the phone, I said, "Hi, Celia. I guess you heard that. Would you like to have dinner with Jenny tonight? Tommy and I will be here too." I heard her melodic laugh, followed by a quick acceptance. "Great," I said. "Why don't you get here about 6? After we concluded arrangements, I hung up and turned to my daughter. "Well, she's coming," I said. "I hope you're happy." "Oh, yes, Dad," she squealed. "Well, in that case, you and Tommy need to start doing some straightening up around here so she doesn't think we live like pigs." "Oh, Dad, do I have to?" Tommy complained. But before I could reply, the boy turned and started to pick up the clothes he'd left in the den. He's still a teenager, I thought, but he seems to be doing better. As I turned to head for the kitchen, I began to consider what dish I could make. Definitely something better than spaghetti and meatballs, I thought, remembering the first time Celia had eaten with us. I finally decided on a fish dish I considered one of my specialties. I felt confident in my ability to make it, and the kids liked it well enough, which was always a plus. To do that, I knew I'd have to make a trip to the grocery store. Explaining my errand to Tommy and Jenny, I enjoined them to stay in the house till I got back. I found a nice piece of salmon in the seafood department and then decided to pick up some dessert from the bakery. I ought to pick up a nice bottle of wine while I'm at it, I thought, and turn my cart down the appropriate aisle. After finding what I wanted, I made a detour to the store's floral department and picked up a bouquet for the table. On my way home, I began to think about what I was doing. I'm really going all out on this meal, I realized in surprise. I finally decided it was because I owed Celia a good meal. After all, I did ruin her lunch, I told myself. Celia rang the doorbell promptly at 6, and before I could get to the door, Jenny was already showing her in. To my amazement, even Tommy deigned to present himself, and the teenage boy actually made a little polite conversation. For my part, I found myself feeling a bit awkward and inarticulate, but if she noticed, Celia made no sign. Instead, she chatted happily with Jenny and willingly went with her to see something the girl wanted to show her in her room. By the time the two of them reappeared, dinner was almost ready. The meal proved a great success. Celia was suitably impressed by my cooking skills. "Oh, a man who can cook." "Mother warned me about men like you," she teased, and was also clearly at ease with my kids, both of whom chattered away to her in response to her questions. When dessert was finished, she insisted on joining in the cleanup, and with her help, the dishes were soon cleared, rinsed, and put in the dishwasher to be run later. At that point, Tommy wandered off to resume a video game he had paused, and Jenny wanted to watch a favorite program she had TiVo'd. So the two adults refilled their wine glasses and wandered out to the living room. "Mike, everything was wonderful," Celia complimented me. "I don't know when I've had such a good time. Thank you so much for asking me. I think Jenny would never have spoken to me again if I hadn't." I laughed, and Celia joined me. "She's a wonderful young lady, and you're lucky to have her," she responded, "and her dad does pretty well, too." I felt my face flush, but then Celia's face took on a more serious look. "Mike, in addition to having a lovely time with you, I'm glad you invited me because there's some information I want to share with you." I caught the new tone in her voice and looked at her curiously. "This is highly confidential, Mike, but I feel I know you well enough to trust you, and it concerns you at least indirectly." Now, she definitely had my attention. "As you know," Celia began, "the NYBI had to make a routine investigation before a death certificate could be issued for your wife. And as you also know, we found nothing to give us any reason not to proceed with the declaration, which was duly issued." She took a deep breath and continued. "Naturally, we did the same thing on Jim Martin, but there we found a few oddities. For one thing, it appears he was in financial trouble after a series of bad investment decisions." I nodded. What Celia said mirrored what Sarah had told me. "Moreover, in the last few weeks," Celia went on, "the security department at IMC let us know that they have uncovered what appear to be significant irregularities in the Northeastern Region Accounting Department, the function that Jim Martin headed. Even more disturbing, they believe they've uncovered a fraudulent invoicing scheme that may have embezzled millions of dollars from IMC, and Jim Martin appears to have authorized it." "Poor Sarah," I commented. "She didn't deserve this." But then I began to process what Celia had told me, and new possibilities began to arise. Could Jim Martin have had a hand in the crash, I asked? Could it have been a way to cover his tracks? When Celia said nothing, my imagination went into high gear. What if Emily found out about Martin's scheme? What if he murdered her to silence her and used the plane crash to hide the evidence? Could he still be alive? Maybe he's tucked away in some villa by the sea, laughing at all of us. "Slow down, Mike," Celia urged. "You're getting carried away. The most likely scenario is still that the plane went down unexpectedly, just like we've thought all along. If Martin was indeed involved in an embezzling scheme, the crash cut short his plans. We'll investigate all the possibilities, but we can't jump to conclusions, and neither should you, but it was hard for me to turn off my imagination." "You don't think Emily could have been in on it, do you?" I asked abruptly. Celia sighed. "It's not impossible," she conceded, "but we don't think it's likely. In the first place, if she were involved, that would mean she was planning in advance to abandon her family. It's unusual for a mother to abandon her children, especially kids their age," she said, gesturing toward the kids' rooms. "Martin, in contrast, had no children, and his wife has indicated that their marriage was on the rocks at the time of his disappearance. Moreover, unlike Martin, Emily's finances were in good shape, and she did nothing prior to her disappearance that would suggest she was in on any scheme, assuming there was one. In fact, if anything, her actions were just the opposite of someone planning to disappear. But all that is just speculation. The one fact we do have," Celia went on, "is that Emily's plane did go down at sea." She had hoped to calm me, but as she looked at me, she could see that I was still upset by her revelations. "Mike, you've got to promise me that you won't say anything about all this. It's highly confidential, and if word got out, it could jeopardize our investigation. It could also get me fired." That brought me up short. I realized that Celia had taken a risk in confiding in me, and I owed her an obligation to keep quiet. "I understand, Celia, and I promise I won't compromise your investigation. But I have to ask, why did you tell me all this?" She looked at me seriously. "It's highly unlikely, Mike, but there's always the possibility that you might hear something, or find out something that could help us shed light on all this. If you do, Mike, promise me you'll contact me right away. No Lone Ranger acts, please." I returned her look. "I promise, Celia." Then I smiled. Besides, having to contact you again wouldn't be such a chore. The smile she gave me seemed to brighten the room. Shortly after that, Celia had to leave. Before doing so, she made a point of saying goodbye to both Tommy and Jenny. I noted that Tommy actually paused his game to say goodnight, a real compliment coming from him. Once again, Jenny walked her friend to the door, extracting a promise from Celia to call her. But this time, after Jenny had hugged her, Celia made a point of leaning back inside the door and bestowing a kiss on my cheek. As she walked to her car, Jenny looked up at me and said, She likes you, Daddy. I smiled at my daughter and clasped her to me. Well, I like her too. After everyone had turned in for the night and the house had grown quiet, I lay in my bed chewing over what Celia had told me and all the various scenarios I had imagined. Oh, Emily, I thought, what did you get yourself into? Finally, I fell into a restless sleep. It was a week later while I was on my computer when I noticed something unusual. I had been reading about some of my favorite sports teams, and as I got ready to click on my Falcons bookmark, I noticed the Facebook icon just above it. On a whim, I clicked it. I was not a Facebook follower. In truth, I rarely ever visited the site. The only reason I had set up an account was to allow me to keep an eye on my children. Both Tommy and Jenny loved the social networking site and used it as another way to stay in touch with their friends. I initially had no objection, but after reading a couple of scary articles about some of the pitfalls, I set up my own account and insisted that Tommy and Jenny friend me. I also had them give me their passwords to their pages as well. That way, I reasoned, I could see any messages or pictures they posted, as well as anything their friends sent to them. Even more important, I figured, Tommy and Jenny would know I could monitor them, and that, I hoped, would encourage them to be prudent. As I logged on to my own page, most of what I saw held little interest for me. But I did notice a friend request from someone I had never heard of, Mark Mason. The name didn't sound familiar, and there was no picture, only a silhouette. When I clicked on the name, the stranger's page blandly informed me that personal information was available only to friends. "Hey, Tommy," I yelled, "do we know a Mark Mason?" My son walked into the room and saw that I was looking at Facebook. "Oh, that guy, just ignore him, Dad. He's been bugging me to friend him for weeks now. I just delete his requests." Jenny popped into the room just then. "Yeah, he's been trying to get me to friend him too. He's just some Facebook creep." That was enough to catch my attention. Some unknown person not only wanted to make contact with me, but also with my children. There were all kinds of scam artists out there, I knew, and a few far worse predators as well. I was alarmed, but I didn't want to frighten my children, so all I said was, "You two did exactly the right thing. Don't ever respond to anyone you don't know well over the internet." Grasping for ways to protect my family, I had a sudden idea. I wonder if Celia could help us find out who this Mason creep is. I called her at home, and she must have seen my name on caller ID because she answered warmly, "Hi, Mike." "Hi, Celia. I'm glad I caught you. Is there any chance you could come over? Something odd has come up, and I'd like to check it out with you if you're free." "It's nothing serious, is it? Tommy and Jenny are okay, aren't they?" As I reassured her, I couldn't help but observe that she seemed as concerned about my children as I was. It gave me a warm feeling. She told me she'd been working in the yard but could be over in 45 minutes. To my surprise, almost exactly to the minute, her car pulled up to the curb. With Emily, I remembered, you were lucky if she wasn't more than an hour late trying to make her image perfect. But here was Celia, right on time, obviously freshly showered and clad in a casual but attractive outfit, with her hair nicely combed and wearing fresh makeup. It was clear that she'd made a special effort even in such a short time. "You look nice, Celia." "You didn't have to get all dressed up for us," I told her. She squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mike. I wanted to." Once she was in the house, I called my kids. When they came noisily into the den, I asked them to tell Celia about their Facebook friend. As the official expert in the family, Tommy seized the opportunity to show off by rapidly logging on to each of the 3 family Facebook accounts in turn and retrieving the friend request from the mysterious Mark Mason. After complimenting Tommy on his skill, Celia seated herself in front of the screen and called up all the unread and archived messages, but she wasn't able to uncover any additional information. Finally, she looked up at Tommy and Jenny. The most likely answer is that this is some kind of marketing ploy. If you had accepted the request, you'd probably be receiving all kinds of ads for junk you don't want, or offers for imaginary gold from Nigeria. There are some bad people out there, and you should never give any information about yourself to strangers, okay? The 2 kids nodded solemnly, And I thought to myself that hearing that message from Celia probably had more impact on them than when I had given it. It had grown dark outside while we'd been working at the computer, and I knew my kids would soon be hungry. Celia, we're probably going to go out to get some dinner in a little while. It won't be anything fancy, just a family-style restaurant, but we'd love to have you join us if you can. Immediately, as I had known they would, Jenny and even Tommy began to clamor for her to come with us. She laughingly surrendered to the inevitable. The four of us piled into my sedan and headed off to a casual place not far from our home. As we drove, Celia began asking the two kids about some of what she'd seen posted on their Facebook pages. And soon Jenny and Tommy were eagerly talking about their friends and activities. As I listened to the conversation, I marveled. Celia probably already knows more about what's going on in Jenny's and Tommy's lives than Emily ever did. I recalled that on the rare occasions before her death when we'd all gone out together, Emily's conversations revolved mainly around her job. I felt guilty for my disloyalty, but I knew it was true. The lively conversation continued through dinner and the trip back home, and I was pleased when Celia came in the house with us. The kids promptly plopped themselves in front of the TV and asked Celia to come watch with them, but she begged off. "I need to talk with your dad a while." She took my hand and led me into the living room. After we were seated, her face grew serious, and she said, "I didn't want to alarm Tommy and Jenny, but I don't really think those Facebook requests were a marketing ploy. The Bureau has gotten warnings about some identity theft scams, but those normally don't target children. This looks to me like someone is making a concerted effort to get information about your family." The thought of a threat to my children sent a chill through me. Who could it be? What could they want? "I don't know, Mike," she replied. "This doesn't seem to fit any pattern of cyber scam I've seen before. What can we do? Should I close their Facebook accounts? Should I keep them off the net altogether?" She looked thoughtful. "I don't think that's necessary as long as they're careful and don't have any interactions with strangers. And if they get nonsense emails with embedded websites, warn them never to click on the links." She thought some more and spoke up. "The trouble with the internet is that it's so amorphous. You can't tell who you're dealing with or where they are, but it's not quite as opaque as most people think. I've got a friend with the federal government who might be able to help us. He probably can't find out who Mark Mason is, but he might be able to tell us where he lives. Let me make a phone call on Monday, and I'll let you know what I find out." With that, she arose and went into the den to say goodnight to the two kids. When she returned, I walked her to the door, but before I opened it, I hugged her. "You've been like a guardian angel to us," I said earnestly. "I don't know what we would have done without you." She looked me in the eye for a moment, then gave me a quick kiss on the lips. "I don't know whether I want to be an angel," she said with a wink. "They don't have all that much fun." Then she turned and walked rapidly to her car, leaving me standing there bemused. True to her word, Celia called me late on Monday morning. "Do you know anyone in Palm Beach, Florida?" she asked. "Not a soul," I replied. "Well, whoever Mason is, he set up his Facebook account from a zip code that starts with 334. So he's somewhere in Palm Beach County," she said. "I can't imagine why anyone in Palm Beach would be trying to connect with us," I said, "but at least he's not anywhere nearby." "That's reassuring." "I agree," Celia said. "Furthermore, we've traced a lot of scams to South Florida, so maybe this really is only some new kind of internet scheme. Just be sure Tommy and Jenny don't have anything to do with those friend requests." "I will, Celia, and thanks. I feel a lot better about all this." "I'm so glad I could help, Mike." Despite what I had said to Celia, I was not reassured at all. On the contrary, I felt as though my children and I were under a continuous assault. First had come the terrible news of Emily's death, followed by poor Tommy's revelation that his mother had cheated on me. Then I had been told that Emily might have been involved in some crooked business dealings before her death. And now some unknown person was trying to get information on my children. I felt like we were under siege, and I decided I was going to fight back. My first priority was to find the enemy in Palm Beach County and confront him. But how could I do that? A quick check online showed the county had a total population of 1.3 million. Searching for Mark Mason would be like looking for a short stick in high grass. Besides, I thought, the name was just as likely to be a phony. My orderly mind continued to wrestle with the problem. Then an idea hit me. If I can't find Mason, maybe I can get him to find me. A plan began to take shape in my head. It's a long shot, I admitted, but it's all I've got. The first thing I had to do was to get Tommy and Jenny safely out of the way. It was almost time for summer vacation, and that gave me an idea. I dialed the number of my in-laws. "Dad, would you and Mom be interested in having Tommy and Jenny come visit for a week? I've got to make a trip out of town during that time, so it would really help me if you could." When the children's grandfather had gladly agreed and the logistics of their stay were arranged, I hung up and immediately called Delta. I'd like to book a flight to Palm Beach. My kids were excited to hear about the upcoming visit to their grandparents, but their enthusiasm was dampened when they learned I wasn't coming with them. This would be the first time we'd been separated since their mother's death, and the prospect brought back some of the fear of abandonment they'd been dealing with ever since that painful time. I hated to cause my children any kind of distress, but I felt I had to do what I had planned, so I managed to persuade them. The week before their visit was to begin, I found myself beset with doubts. Am I doing the right thing? I kept asking myself. But despite my uncertainty, the thought of doing nothing was even worse. My inner turmoil was interrupted briefly by a phone call from Celia calling to inquire how I and my family were doing. After chatting a few minutes, her tone of voice changed slightly, and I thought she sounded almost shy. "I was wondering if you'd like to get together next week. It's been a while since I've seen you and the kids," and her voice trailed off uncertainly. "I'd love to do that, Celia, but I'm taking the kids to see their grandparents, then we'll be gone all week." "Oh," she said, "I understand, maybe some other time." "I'd really like that, Celia," I said fervently. I had hated to lie to Celia about my plans, but I told myself at least it was partly true. Besides, I was sure I knew what she would say if I had revealed my true plans. When I returned home after dropping my children off at my in-laws' home in the country, I immediately sat down at the family computer. One of the reasons I'd asked Emily's family to take my kids was that I knew they didn't have a computer. Accordingly, I felt safe in logging on to Jenny's Facebook account. Sure enough, there was a friend request from Mark Mason. I clicked on the accept option and quickly received confirmation that Jenny was now friends with the stranger. If nothing comes of this, I thought, I'll just unfriend him later. Next came the most difficult part, pretending to be a 12-year-old girl. I had studied my daughter's previous postings, and I thought I could do an acceptable job of emulating her style. I probably won't fool her friends, I admitted to myself, but hopefully I can fool Mark Mason. I decided my first post should set the stage, so I wrote a brief note mentioning Jenny's visit to the country. Just a little update for her friends, I thought. Nothing to make a lurker suspicious. The next day was when I planned to set the trap. OMG, I'm going to Florida. My BFF Celia offered to take me with her, and Daddy said yes, leaving tomorrow, can't wait. I decided to use Celia's name because I felt neither Jenny's friends nor Mark Mason would know her. I hoped Celia wouldn't mind. Now that the bait was in the water, I hoped to wiggle it enough to attract the fish attention. I can't believe I'm in Palm Beach. It's to die for. That evening, I posted the next installment, "Spent the day at the beach. I'm going to be so tan." The next morning, I posted the note that I hoped would set the hook, "Heading back to the beach today." Tomorrow, Celia is taking me shopping on Worth Avenue. We're going to have lunch at Taboo. Too cool. As soon as the entry appeared on Jenny's page, I headed for Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Soon I was settled in for the 2-hour flight to Palm Beach. As I gazed out the window, I recalled that I had been to Palm Beach once before. In fact, Emily and I had driven through the city on our way back from our honeymoon in Miami Beach. We'd taken the bridge across Lake Worth and then driven along South Ocean Boulevard, gawking at the mansions overlooking the Atlantic. Upon landing, I picked up a rental car and drove to the motel in West Palm Beach, where I'd made reservations. There was a fast food restaurant across the street, and I picked up a sandwich and a cola that I ate in my room while studying a map of the city on my laptop. I hope I'm doing the right thing, I thought. Following breakfast, I checked Jenny's Facebook page, but all I found were a few envious replies from classmates of hers. I hadn't really expected any contact from Mason, but I had hoped for some kind of indication that my fishing expedition might land something. About 10, I got in my car and drove east across the Royal Park Bridge, turned south, and then east again onto Worth Avenue. I wanted to be in position early, and I needed to park my car on the street so I could get to it quickly if need be. After circling the block where the restaurant was located numerous times, I began to wonder if I'd miscalculated. But suddenly, a car pulled out just ahead of me, and I was able to pull into the vacated parking spot. After feeding the meter, I walked along the street in front of the restaurant. Spotting a bench in the shade, I gratefully took a seat. I'd brought along a baseball cap and sunglasses, and I put those on in hopes of disguising myself. Then I pulled out a copy of the Palm Beach Post and pretended to read while scanning the street. As I sat there, the realization of how flimsy my plan was slowly began to sink in. I had no idea if the mysterious Mark Mason had even seen the phony postings on Jenny's Facebook page, nor if he would show up in response. Even worse, I had no idea for whom I was looking. Unless the mystery man turned out to be Jim Martin, which I had to admit was pretty unlikely, how would I identify the threat? All I could hope was to spot someone acting suspiciously, whatever that meant. The street was crowded, and I kept busy trying to watch all the passers-by. The restaurant began to fill up, and as I watched people entering, my stomach began to growl. I cursed myself for not thinking to bring along a sandwich, but I dared not leave my post. Time slowly crept by as I sat there, and after a while I saw that the restaurant crowd was beginning to thin out. A glance at my watch told me it was after 1. What an idiot, I thought. I wouldn't have been any worse off if I'd stayed home, and at least I could have seen Celia again. As I watched the window shoppers stroll by, my eyes were caught by a woman strolling on the other side of the street. I'm doing it again, I thought, seeing Emily in a crowd of strangers. In fact, I noted, the woman really didn't look like Emily at all. Emily had shoulder-length brunette hair. This woman was a blonde with her hair cut short. Likewise, her clothes were a different style than anything I'd ever seen Emily wear. But there was something about her that looked eerily familiar. As I continued to watch, I realized it was the way she walked that had triggered my reaction. Impulsively, I stood up and started to walk after her. Looking down the street, I saw the blonde had reached the corner and was trying to flag down a taxi. Risking his life, I ran across Worth Avenue and jumped in my car. Just as I was pulling away from the curb, I saw the woman clamber into the back of a cab and start off down the avenue toward the Atlantic. Before it came to South Ocean Boulevard, the cab turned left on County Road and began driving north. I followed at a distance. Finally, I saw the cab turn left on a suburban street and continue until it almost reached Lake Worth. I pulled my car to the side of the road about a football field's length away and watched as the woman paid the driver and then went into an elegant home that appeared to front on the lake. I squinted my eyes in an effort to see her clearly. With her hair color and short hairdo, she looked nothing like Emily, but she was the same height and weight, and as she proceeded up the walkway to the house, I was again struck by her walk. As I sat there in the car, I suddenly remembered a book I had read long ago. In the story, an actor found it necessary to disguise himself, but rather than use a false mustache or wig, he simply put pebbles in his shoes. "If someone sees me," the actor told a friend, "they'll say, 'That looks kind of like the guy, but it's not him because he'll be walking differently.' It works the other way too," I thought. As I remembered the book, I grew more and more certain that I had just seen my late wife. Trying to control my rising anger, I ran down the street and up to the door. I rang the doorbell and then crossed my arms to wait. When the woman opened the door, she looked at me with a puzzled glance. Then she did a double-take and shrieked, "Mike, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Emily. Funny running into you here," I said sarcastically. After a moment's hesitation, she threw her arms wide to embrace me, but I quickly held my hands up to stop her. "Don't touch me," I snarled. Then I could no longer constrain my anger, and I yelled, "How could you do this to me? How could you abandon Tommy and Jenny?" Glancing anxiously toward the street behind me, Emily grabbed my arm and pulled me into the house, pushing the door closed behind me. "I did it all for you, baby, for you and the kids," she said urgently. "You've got to believe me. It was the only way." As she spoke, she kept glancing around nervously. "What in the hell are you talking about?" I demanded hotly. "You're not making sense. None of this makes any sense." "Sit down, baby," she urged me. "You've got to let me explain." She was still speaking loudly and was nervously rubbing her hands together as she took a seat and encouraged me to do so. An icy calm came over me as I sat down. "All right, Emily, I'm listening. I was so close, baby. I had the big job I wanted in my pocket, but then the damned economy began to tank. I knew if I could just keep the region's numbers up a little while longer, the economy would come back, and the promotion would be in the bag." She gave me a pleading smile and held her hands palm out toward me. "And Mike, once I got that job, we'd have been on easy street, no worries about paying for college for the kids, no worries about retirement, no worries ever again. I could barely contain myself. This was all about money and your position in the company." Emily's hands fell back in her lap. "So Jim and I?" "Jim Martin," I said darkly. "Yes," she went on, not reading my mood. "You met him. Anyway, he and I figured out a way to pull some sales forward from our biggest accounts. We knew they'd come through eventually. We just booked them early in the current quarter. All the other regions were reporting big sales declines, and we were pulling in major increases. Corporate was just blown away. We earned the biggest bonuses the company has ever paid," she said proudly. Then the smile slipped from her face like a tissue dropping to the floor. "But the economy got worse instead of better. And when Jim told me it was all going to come out eventually, I knew we had to do something. We knew we'd need a lot of cash to pull it off, so Jim set up a dummy supplier account and began sending fake invoices to IMC. They're so sloppy and wasteful at that place they never even noticed." "So you plan to fake your deaths in a plane crash to cover your tracks?" I asked. "That's right, baby," she said, as though I were her star pupil. "With enough money, it's not hard to get somebody to leave a Zodiac motorboat with a GPS signal out in the Caribbean. We just homed in on the signal and crash-landed right beside it." "So the whole thing was just a way to steal a bunch of money and abandon your family?" I asked bitterly. "No, baby," she protested. "That's not it at all. I knew I'd have to get out of sight for a while, but I made sure you and the kids would be okay. I loaded up on life insurance and put everything I could into my 401k so you guys would have plenty of money," she said proudly. "And you thought having enough money would make up for losing my wife and their mother?" This time she heard the bitterness. "No, baby, no, you don't understand. I was going to come back for you. Once everything had had a chance to blow over, I was going to contact you. We could go someplace safe, baby. We could be together." As she spoke, her eyes continued to dart around the room. I looked at her with a stony gaze. "There's just one thing you've left out," I said in a flat voice. "What's that, baby?" she asked. "You forgot the part about you screwing Jim Martin," I said. She was startled at first, but then she stood and lifted her arms to me. "No, baby, it wasn't like that. Jim and I just worked together. We were never more than colleagues at work." "Don't lie to me, Emily," I snapped. "Tommy saw you two together in our bedroom." She gasped. "Oh my God, Tommy saw us. Oh, that's terrible." A sob caught in her throat, but then she recovered and straightened up again. "It was just the one time, baby. He told me he wouldn't help me unless I gave myself to him, but it was just the one time. I swear it." I stood up, ignoring her. I looked around. "Come on out, Jim," I said loudly. "I know you're back there somewhere." Emily continued to wail. "No, baby, it's just me. It was just the one time." But before she could continue, Jim Martin emerged from the bedroom. He was wearing a bathrobe and his hands were stuffed in his pockets. "Give it up, Emily." "He knows," Martin snarled. Even though I guessed that the two of them had been living together, hearing Martin use my wife's pet name caused me to bristle. Emily began to weep. "He must have found us through Facebook," Martin hissed at her. "I warned you, but you just had to check up on your two brats." Then his tone changed to something cold and hard. But it doesn't matter now. We've got to get out of here. He turned to me and from the pocket of his robe pulled a snub-nosed automatic which he brandished in my direction. As for you, bright boy, you're the only one who knows we're still alive. No, Jim, no, Emily screamed, but Martin ignored her. It looks like your kids are going to lose their daddy as well as their mommy, he said with a sneer as he raised the gun at me. I wouldn't do that if I were you, came a voice from the entry hall. All three of us jerked around to look in amazement as the figure of Celia Murray emerged, holding her Smith Wesson automatic leveled at Martin. Before he could react, a second voice spoke up from behind him. Drop the gun, Martin. It's all over. Special Agent Harold Barnes stepped out of the kitchen, his pistol also trained on Martin. The former accounting executive glared at the two agents with hostility, but then his shoulders slumped, and he dropped the gun to the carpet and slowly raised his hands. While Barnes kept his weapon trained on Martin, Celia swiftly stepped behind the sullen man and twisted one of his arms behind his back, cuffing him at the wrist. Then she swung his other arm down and clicked the second cuff shut. Once Martin was secure, she repeated the process with Emily. When the two were lying on the floor, Barnes got on his cell phone to the Palm Beach Police Department. A second call went to the local FBI office. In a short while, the house was swarming with uniformed and plainclothes officers. I just stood to one side, looking on in a daze. As the two fugitives were being led away, I peered carefully at them both. Martin was muttering to himself, and Emily was weeping. Neither glanced in my direction. When they were gone, Celia went over to Barnes and gave him a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Thanks for coming with me, partner. I owe you big time. The older agent smiled. No, you don't owe me anything. Solving this case is going to look real good on both our records. As Barnes left, Celia finally looked at me. To my amazement, she walked over to me, threw her arms around my neck, and began to sob. You big idiot! Don't you ever do that to me again. You could have gotten yourself killed. I held her tightly until her crying subsided. Then I tilted her back away from me enough to look at her face. What are you doing here? How did you know where to find me? She smiled through her tears. Jenny called me to chat. When she told me that you weren't with them at their grandparents' house, I got suspicious. You were going to do something stupid and started checking around. When I saw her posts on Facebook, I called the airlines and found out you had booked a flight to Palm Beach. I talked Harold into coming with me, and we've been following you ever since this morning. She shook her head. We almost lost you when you took off after that taxi. But Harold guessed which way you'd turned, and he was right. I held her even tighter. I guess you really are my guardian angel, I said, and kissed her. 2 years later, I pulled the collar of my coat tighter around my neck. The humidity was high as always, and the wind off Puget Sound was cold and damp. Still, I thought, it feels good to be here. The past 2 years had been hard in many ways. While it had been a terrible shock to me to find my wife alive, the impact on Tommy and Jenny was even worse. Having to see her brought to trial and convicted on multiple criminal charges only added to the family's pain. During the inevitable media frenzy surrounding the arrest and trial, I feared my kids wouldn't make it through it. The divorce was a mere formality. Emily might no longer be legally dead, but she would be spending the next 12 years of her life in Arundel State Prison. International Marketing Corporation, of course, demanded that I return not only Emily's life insurance, but also the bulk of her 401k since it had been funded based on bonuses she had not earned. As an innocent party, I might have had a case for keeping some of the funds, but I wanted nothing to do with any portion of the money from my ex-wife. Instead, I began an urgent search for a job since my family's savings were all but exhausted. The offer I got from a major aerospace company was a welcome one, not only because it would ensure the means to provide for my family, but also because it meant a relocation across the country. There were too many reminders of Emily in Atlanta, and too many questions from friends and others that I and my children couldn't answer. Finding a new place to live and work seemed like the best solution for all of us. I hated to leave the state where I and my children were born, but I was ready to embrace the Pacific Northwest, and start a new life. We'd gotten lucky on the sale of our Atlanta home and were able to buy a nice, if somewhat smaller, house in Seattle. Emily had always wanted to live in a showplace. I was happy with something cozier. The kids seemed to like it too, and they were already making friends at their new school. I came in off the deck and looked around for my car keys. Finding them, I stuck my head in the kitchen to look for my wife. "Come on, Angel, let's go pick up our kids." Celia smiled happily at me. "Thanks for watching. What would you have done if you found out your spouse was living a double life? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unbelievable stories.